Chapter 276. After Qin Wenyin obtained the ancient manual, he immersed himself in comprehending it. At the same time, he sensed the transformations in his body. This closed-door seclusion lasted for a total of 2 months, causing him to lose track of time. In these 2 months, he deeply felt the power of his bloodline. At the same time, he also experienced the profoundness of the ancient manual left behind by the Gold Element Celestial Lord. The Gold Element Celestial was truly an extraordinary character. Regardless of his attainments in the Tao of Divine Inscriptions or his cultivation base, he was extremely powerful. In fact, Qin Wenyin was thinking that although the other inheritance he left behind had been discarded by him, it should still be extremely powerful. However, Qin Wenyin had no regrets. He believed in his intuition. If it wasn't for the fact that he had opened his third eye and personally witnessed that the golden armored giants weren't puppets, he wouldn't have doubted the inheritance. But now that he saw the 9 golden armored giants guarding the inheritance like puppets, and even sacrificing their lives to control the golden armored giants, Qin Wenyin couldn't help but doubt the authenticity of the ancient manual. Hence, he gave up. In these 2 months, his strength had risen by leaps and bounds. Regardless of his attainments in the Tao of Divine Inscriptions, the current him was more and more confident in himself. Most probably, it wouldn't be too long before he would be able to establish a foothold in the Moon continent. He wouldn't be like now, unable to do anything he wanted. This was also the feeling Qin Wenyin had after coming to the Moon continent. That sense of urgency caused him to constantly think of ways to increase his strength. In truth, his cultivation base was already outstanding enough. He stepped onto the path of cultivation at the age of 16 and awakened his 3 astral souls, all originating from the 5th heavenly layer. Up until now, he had never met anyone who could match up to him. Stepping into Yuanfu before the age of 18, his name shook the entire Chu country. Not only that, he even managed to determine the ruler of the Chu country. This was an achievement that many would never be able to achieve in their entire lives. And now, he wasn't even 19 yet. His current cultivation base was at the 4th level of Yuanfu. During his closed-door seclusion, he broke through again, stepping into the 4th level of Yuanfu from the 3rd level. His Yuanfu pool grew stronger, and his insights into the Tao of martial Tao grew deeper. Not far away, a beautiful silhouette walked over. Although Bailu Yi wasn't as beautiful as Mo Qingqing, she gave off a sense of comfort when looking at her. She was clean, refreshing, pure, and sexy. Every time people saw her, their eyes would light up. "You rascal, you still know to come back." Bailu Yi glared coquettishly at Qin Wenyin. In front of Qin Wenyin, she didn't have to feign coldness anymore. She was more and more casual, occasionally revealing her feminine side, adding to her charm. Qin Wenyin stared at Bailu Yi as a smile flashed across his face. "From your tone, why do I feel as though this is my home?" "In your dreams." Bailu Yi glared at him. "How was your harvest this time around?" "I've gained a lot. Do you want to take a look at the Ascendant's ancient scroll?" Qin Wenyin stared at Bailu Yi with a teasing look in his eyes. And indeed, upon hearing his words, Bailu Yi's beautiful eyes instantly lit up. The ancient scroll of the Ascendant, to a genius divine inscriptionist, was simply too attractive. If the people of the Moon continent were to learn of this, it would definitely cause many 4th-ranked grandmasters to go crazy over it. "Forget it, you were the one who snatched the inheritance, it should belong to you," Bailu Yi replied after some thought. "I didn't say I would give it to you," Qin Wenyin laughed, causing Bailu Yi to glare at him fiercely. Was he joking with her? "I'll lend it to you for a few days, it won't affect my comprehension." Qin Wenyin shrugged, causing Bailu Yi's beautiful eyes to freeze. Staring at the teasing look on Qin Wentian's face, she involuntarily punched him in the chest. Qin Wenyin naturally wouldn't be stingy with Bailu Yi. This beautiful young lady had used her own body to block an attack from Zhu Sha when they were fighting for the inheritance. "Where's Big Bro Chu Mang and Fatty?" Qin Wenyin couldn't help but ask when he saw little rascal running over. The two of them are currently in a frenzy, roaming all over the place to temper themselves. During these 2 months, they've already accumulated countless battle achievements in the Hell Arena. Bailu Yi's words caused Qin Wentian's heart to tremble. Fatty finally wasn't lazy anymore. Leng Ning's death must have been a huge blow to him. In the vast Grand Xia Empire, experts were as common as the clouds. If one didn't have enough strength, they could only watch helplessly as the heart-wrenching things happened. If Qin Wendian had his current strength back then, the Leng clan wouldn't have been able to touch a single strand of hair on Leng Ning's head. Yen Tai, whom the Leng clan tried to curry favor with, would be easily killed by the current him. Qin Wendian, come with me, I have something important to tell you. Bai Lu Yi's countenance turned solemn as she brought Qin Wendian to a secret location. However, it wasn't the central region. Although Qin Wendian and Bai Lu Yi had a good relationship, as long as Qin Wendian wasn't a core member of the White Deer Institute, he wouldn't be able to enter that place. Di Feng and Di Cheng were exceptions, because they knew the greatest secret of the White Deer Institute, the Azure faction. Although Qin Wendian also knew about it, before Qin Wendian decided to lay his cards on the table, Bai Lu Yi naturally wouldn't tell the White Deer Institute on his behalf. It was up to Qin Wendian to make the decision himself. What's the matter? Qin Wendian couldn't help but ask when he saw Bai Lu Yi pulling him to a secluded location. These few days, a group of people came to the White Deer Institute. One of them is named Di Feng, and he has another name, Emperor Azure. He's ranked number 5 on the Heavenly Fate rankings and is currently in the training grounds of the White Deer Institute. They are from the Di clan, a direct descendant of the Azure Emperor. Bai Lu Yi's words instantly caused Qin Wendian's countenance to turn heavy. Direct descendant of the Azure Emperor, the Di clan. Qin Wendian instantly thought of the headmaster of the Emperor's Star Academy. That old man should still be in the 9 Mystical Palace, right? Qin Wendian wondered if the 9 Mystical Palace had managed to kill him. As he thought of this, Qin Wendian's thirst for power grew even more intense. They know that the White Deer Institute is one of the hidden branches of the Azure Emperor. Their purpose in coming here is to gain control of the White Deer Institute and revive the Azure Emperor Palace, Bai Lu Yi stated, her words causing many thoughts to appear in Qin Wendian's heart. After obtaining the Azure Emperor token, he knew that his path to reclaim the Azure faction wouldn't be smooth. Now that the Di clan had appeared, he couldn't help but wonder what their stance would be. If they knew that the Azure Emperor token was in his hands, what would their attitude be? Without the Azure Emperor token, do you think the White Deer Institute would approve of them? Qin Wendian asked in a heavy voice. These people have some tricks up their sleeves. First, they sent the Silk Pants Di Cheng over, causing the White Deer Institute to have a bad impression of him. And after that, Di Feng appeared, causing the elders of the White Deer Institute to have a good impression of Di Feng. If they really saw hope in him, I think the White Deer Institute might really agree to their request. Bai Lu Yi continued. As for their explanation regarding the Azure Emperor token, they said that the protector of the Azure Emperor token had been captured by the 9 Mystical Palace. They were worried that the secret of the Azure faction would be leaked, and this caused the White Deer Institute to change their plans. Qin Wendian contemplated for a moment after hearing Bai Lu Yi's words. This matter was a challenge to him, but at the same time, it was also an opportunity. The people from the Di clan had helped him break through the layers of paper, causing the White Deer Institute to have the intention of reviving the Azure Emperor Palace. Next, the question was who would be in charge of the Azure faction. After Senior Di passed the Azure Emperor token to me, he was captured by the 9 Mystical Palace because of me. I believe that even in death, Senior Di wouldn't divulge the secret of the Azure faction, Qin Wendian stated, his heart heavy. It seemed like he had no choice but to bring his plans forward. The White Deer Institute, the first battle he would have to succeed. What do you plan to do next? Bai Lu Yi asked Qin Wendian. Qin Wendian smiled when he saw the seriousness in Bai Lu Yi's eyes. Don't worry, even if Di Feng from the Di clan fought with me, the victor would still be mine. So what if he was ranked number 5 on the Heavenly Fate rankings? Very soon he would have the confidence to be on par with Di Feng. Not only that, if he was given more time, in a year or 2 at most, he would become the most dazzling ranker on the Heavenly Fate rankings. This was his conviction, and also his ambition. Let's go, I'll impart the ancient scroll of the Ascendant to you. Qin Wendian laughed. Bai Lu Yi also smiled as she stared at his handsome countenance. She believed that Qin Wendian would definitely win, no matter what challenges he had to face. Ranked number 11, Zhang Chen, number 18, Yang Fan, Zhao Lai, Hua Feng and Qin Wendian, didn't they already snatch the inheritance right under their noses? So what if he was ranked number 5? In a place extremely far away from the moon continent, there was an ancient city where humans and demonic beasts coexisted, the Celestial Lake Palace. At this moment, the palace mistress of the Celestial Lake Palace was respectfully standing in the middle of the great hall, gazing at the peerless beauty seated before her. Fairy Qing lazily laid there, her beautiful eyes flickering with a demonic light. Her jade-like hands rapped on the chair as she asked in a low voice, "That old fellow, can't he stay idle any longer?" The news I received was that currently the two major powers have already divided into two factions. No one is able to suppress the other, the palace mistress calmly replied. He, who would have thought that even before they could rise up, there would already be a worm growing within them. Even before the Azure Emperor token was issued, they already wanted to seize power? Fairy Qingmei's smile was filled with a trace of coldness. Seems like that's what they're thinking. During these years, they've gradually grown stronger and stronger, with many geniuses emerging from their ranks. Right now, Di Feng has already arrived at the White Deer Institute in the Moon Continent. The palace mistress of the Celestial Lake Palace seemed to be extremely familiar with the happenings in the Moon Continent. How are things going with Qing and that little fellow? Will that lass's heart be moved? A gentle smile involuntarily appeared on Fairy Qingmei's face as she thought of Qing. She should be fine. Master should know of Qing's temperament. She's always cold and indifferent. It would be extremely difficult to make her enter the mortal world. The palace mistress bitterly smiled as she continued, "As for that little fellow, he's not bad at all." Fairy Qingmei's gaze froze. "It's rare for you to have such a high evaluation of him. Since this is the case, why don't you send some people out to take a look? Don't let that little fellow be too isolated. It's fine if nothing happens, but if there really is a conflict at the very least, I should let them know my stance." Chapter 277. After Qin Wenyan passed the scroll to Bailu immediately immersed herself in it, forgetting everything else. She had always been infatuated with divine inscriptions. Now that she saw the profound Tao of divine inscriptions of her ascendant, she was like Qin Wenyan back then, unable to extricate herself. The gold element ascendant's understanding of divine inscriptions, as well as the various combinations of divine inscriptions, were far superior compared to the White Deer Institute. What made Bailu even more moved was that within the scroll, there were many powerful fourth-ranked divine inscriptions, fourth-ranked formations, fourth-ranked weaponsmithing techniques, and fourth-ranked puppetry. Sadly, she didn't have that level of attainment yet. She couldn't comprehend it and could only comprehend it bit by bit. After Qin Wenyan met with Chu Mang and the rest, he once again entered closed-door seclusion, staying with Bailu in the White Deer Cavern. Little Rascal naturally stayed by his side as well. In truth, Qin Wenyan originally wanted to stay in the desert for a longer period of time. But when he thought of how worried Bailu and Fan Lu would be, he hurriedly returned. Now that there was a chance to cultivate together with Bailu, exchanging insights, it was a wonderful thing. However, Di Cheng's mood wasn't that wonderful. If the Di clan wanted to gain full control of the White Deer Institute, other than acknowledging them, they naturally had to maintain a good relationship with the Institute. And Di Feng, who had the potential to become the future leader of the Azure faction, was undoubtedly the most suitable person to do such a thing. If the White Deer Institute truly acknowledged him, they would naturally be willing to help him. In the world of cultivation, after benefits, relationships would naturally be the most important. As such, Di Feng had been staying in the White Deer Institute as a guest for the past few days. At the same time, he would visit the residences of the various elders. Occasionally, he would interact with the younger generation as well, and the White Deer Institute's impression of Di Feng was getting better and better. Di Cheng, on the other hand, wasn't feeling too good. Those from the White Deer Institute didn't have a good impression of him. He was always idling around, and now that he heard that Bailu was cultivating with a young man, How could he be in a good mood? Is little E still in closed-door seclusion? At this moment, Di Qing asked. That girl. Bai Lu Yi's father shook his head. He knew that ever since Qin Wendian had returned, Bai Lu Yi had been stuck together with him. A grown girl couldn't be kept at home. He didn't know what was going on, and naturally assumed that Bai Lu Yi and Qin Wendian were together. However, he didn't object. After all, he was quite fond of Qin Wendian. At the very least, he was much better than Di Cheng. No matter what, they were both from the Di clan. How could there be such a huge disparity between Di Cheng and Di Feng? Father, it seems like your daughter is about to be abducted. Bai Lu Jing, who was standing at the side, laughed, as though he was intentionally speaking to Di Cheng. Sure enough, Di Cheng's expression changed slightly as he asked, Qin Wendian, who is he? How is he worthy of Shao Yi? Di Cheng continued to address Bai Lu Yi as Little E. Bai Lu Yi's father and Bai Lu Jing were extremely unhappy, but they couldn't be bothered to correct him. After all, he was a guest. It doesn't matter if he's worthy or not, as long as Little E likes him. Bai Lu Jing intentionally provoked Di Cheng. And indeed, Di Cheng's countenance changed slightly. Master, Miss E, he's out. At this moment, a maid came to report. Bai Lu Yi's father's eyes brightened as he laughed. That lass, she's finally willing to come out. I'll go take a walk first. Di Cheng bid his farewell, causing Bai Lu Yi and Bai Lu Yi to glance at each other. Bai Lu Yi's father then turned to Bai Lu Jing, you should go take a look as well. Bai Lu Jing nodded his head as he stood up and departed, heading in the direction of the White Deer Cavern. Not long after Qin Wendian and Bai Lu Yi exited the White Deer Cavern, there were already so many people in front of them, causing them to feel somewhat depressed. He's Di Cheng. Bai Lu Yi whispered to Qin Wendian. Qin Wendian swept his gaze over, instantly seeing Di Cheng's cultivation base, the 5th level of Yuanfu. Based on Di Cheng's age, this cultivation base wasn't anything special. After which, Qin Wendian saw the 2 elders of the White Deer Institute also passing by. Qin Wendian wanted to see if he could see their cultivation bases, but to his dismay, Qin Wendian discovered that he couldn't. This made Qin Wendian understand that even after he opened his third eye, he could only see the cultivation bases of Yuanfu cultivators. The elders of the White Deer Institute should all be at the Heavenly Dipper realm, hence he couldn't see through them. Little E, I've missed you so much these days. Di Cheng smiled at Bai Lu Yi, causing Qin Wendian to be taken aback. This fellow was truly a genius. Qin Wendian now believed that the reason why the Di clan sent Di Cheng here first to give the White Deer Institute a bad impression wasn't because Di Cheng was faking it. Di Cheng was truly such a person. Bai Lu Yi's countenance changed when she heard Di Cheng's words. Seeing Qin Wendian winking at her, she couldn't help but feel even angrier. Di Cheng, please call me by my name in the future, Bai Lu Yi stated in a depressed tone. After which, she hooked her arm around Qin Wendian's, pulling Qin Wendian along. She glared at Qin Wendian viciously. Who asked this bastard to make fun of her? Qin Wendian smiled bitterly. He was being used as a shield by Bai Lu. Noticing the gazes of the crowd, Qin Wendian could only smile bitterly. Right now, it was impossible for those from the White Deer Institute to not misunderstand. He and Bai Lu Yi often cultivated together, and although there was nothing between them, those from the White Deer Institute wouldn't think so. Qin Wendian? Di Cheng blocked Qin Wendian's path of retreat. His eyes narrowed as a smile appeared on his face, yet it gave off a sinister feeling. You're blocking my way. Qin Wendian smiled as he looked at Di Cheng. I know. Di Cheng nodded his head. I heard that you're an unaffiliated cultivator with an average cultivation background. However, your attainments in the Tao of Divine Inscriptions aren't bad, and you're a 3rd-ranked Divine Inscriptionist. Qin Wendian furrowed his brows. This Di Cheng was extremely clear about his background. And Qin Wendian's countenance was as calm as ever. Although Divine Inscriptionists are respected by others, that's only because they have value. They can help others forge divine weapons and puppets. Even for a powerful Divine Inscriptionist, if he doesn't know how to forge divine weapons, his status will still be limited. After all, it's impossible to rely on divine inscriptions to battle. Ultimately, for cultivators, What matters most is one's cultivation base. Di Cheng slowly explained, his words causing Qin Wenyan to be speechless. This fellow blocked his path and said so much. Was he trying to show how outstanding he was? But the problem was, this Di Cheng himself wasn't that outstanding. Naturally, whether he was outstanding or not depended on who he was compared to. Di Cheng knew that he didn't have the qualifications to compete with Di Feng. But as for the person in front of him, he definitely had to suppress him. In fact, although Di Cheng appeared to be a silk pants, he wasn't stupid. He knew why the Di clan had sent him here first, and he understood his mission. He also knew that he wanted to woo Bailu Yi not only because of her beauty, but also because of her status. As long as he married her, his status in the White Deer Institute would be completely different. And if he succeeded, the Di clan would definitely be extremely satisfied with him. Are you done? Qin Wendian stared at Di Cheng, his tone indifferent. It was as though he didn't even place Di Cheng in his eyes. Such a situation caused the smile in Di Cheng's eyes to grow colder. Did you not understand what I meant? Qin Wendian saw that Di Cheng wasn't willing to let him off the hook, and his countenance also grew sharper. Two terrifying beams of light pierced into Di Cheng's eyes, and in an instant, Di Cheng felt a sense of impending doom. He involuntarily retreated 2 steps, his countenance extremely unsightly to behold. Let's go. Qin Wendian spoke to Bailu. Bailu Yi was like a young girl, quietly hugging his arm. This was a blatant show of flaunting, wanting Di Cheng to completely give up on her. Not far away, Bailu Yi's father and Bailu Jing both had bitter smiles on their faces as they witnessed this scene. Just like what Qin Wendian had predicted, the misunderstanding had deepened. Qin Wendian and Bailu Yi lifted their feet, only to see Di Cheng blocking their path once again. The aura of a 5th-level Yuanfu cultivator erupted forth. Since you don't understand what I meant, let me tell you. Get the hell out of the White Deer Institute. Di Cheng's aura grew even more domineering, suppressing Qin Wendian. However, at this moment, Qin Wendian's footsteps didn't stop. 2 beams of terrifying golden light shot out from his eyes, sweeping over Di Cheng. Di Cheng instantly felt an intense pain in his eyes, as though the pressure of death was pressing down on him. Qin Wendian's majesty was something that couldn't be profaned. Boom! A powerful force slammed into his mind, causing him to groan in pain. His face turned pale. Qin Wendian acted as though nothing had happened as he continued walking forwards. Yet another piercing gaze landed on Di Cheng, causing his countenance to turn even paler. Di Cheng coughed out a mouthful of blood as his countenance turned even paler. Bzz. Di Cheng released his astral souls as astral light flashed. His entire body was enveloped by a layer of mysterious energy as he glared at Qin Wendian. Qin Wendian had already arrived in front of him. Stretching out his palms, he slammed out with his palms. Instantly, terrifying divine inscriptions intertwined with each other, transforming into a terrifying great rock. Di Cheng howled in rage as the claws of the great rock latched onto his chest. After which, he soared through the air and was flung out of the way. Stop! A cold voice rang out, only to see the silhouette of the old man behind Di Cheng trembling as he landed on Di Cheng's back. At the same time, he slammed out with his palms, destroying the great rock in the air. Di Cheng supported the body of the old man as he stood up. Blood could still be seen at the corners of his mouth, and the robes around his chest were torn apart. His countenance was extremely grim. It's not impossible to battle using divine inscriptions. At the very least, I can kill as many as I want. So, don't use your ignorance to show off, Qin Wendian indifferently stated. Di Cheng coughed out yet another mouthful of blood. Chapter 278. After Di Cheng found out that Bailu Yi and Qin Wendian had a close relationship, he inquired about Qin Wendian from the White Deer Institute. Those from the White Deer Institute were all extremely familiar with Qin Wendian, and Di Cheng easily learned that Qin Wendian was a 3rd-ranked divine inscriptionist with a cultivation base at the 3rd level of Yuanfu. Not only that, Qin Wendian didn't have any background, and only got acquainted with Bailu Yi because of divine inscriptions. Hence, the conversation between Qin Wendian and Bailu Yi came to light. Although divine inscriptionists were highly respected, They were only proficient in using divine inscriptions to forge weapons and formations. Very few divine inscriptionists could use divine inscriptions in combat. When both sides clashed, who would give them the time to inscribe divine inscriptions? However, Qin Wenin had used facts to tell them that there were indeed people who could use divine inscriptions in combat. And right now, there was one. Not only that, it was as easy as flipping a palm to deal with him. The eyes of Bailu Jing and Bailu Yi's father brightened, as they gained a clearer understanding of Qin Wentian's attainments in the Tao of divine inscriptions. The path of divine inscriptions was as difficult as the martial path. Even if one had talent, they would need a long period of time to immerse themselves in it. There were many peak-tier third-ranked divine inscriptionists who were already at the peak of the Tao of divine inscriptions. For someone as young as Qin Wenyan to have such attainments in the Tao of divine inscriptions, to the extent that he could even use it in combat, he was definitely a demon-level genius. One could imagine that sooner or later, Qin Wenyan would become a fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist. At that time, his status would be completely different. If he could become a fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist before the age of 20, the weight of his achievements wouldn't be any less than the names on the heavenly fate rankings. At the very least, in the Moon continent, there had never been such a character. However, to advance from the third to the fourth level was akin to advancing from Yuanfu to Heavenly Dipper. It was a huge hurdle that couldn't be easily overcome. At this moment, none of them noticed that not far away, an elder from the White Deer Institute had a brilliant glow in his eyes when he saw Qin Wentian's display of divine inscriptions. In the future, please don't come and harass little E. You are really not worthy. Qin Wentian stared at Di Cheng as he emotionlessly stated. Disregarding Di Cheng's status, he was only speaking from the point of view of Bailu Yi's friend. Bailu Yi was a pure and beautiful young lady, gentle and generous, with outstanding talent. Her man was definitely not someone like Di Cheng. Di Cheng was truly not qualified. Di Cheng's face alternated between green and white. What else could he do after being humiliated by Qin Wenyan? Any words he said had lost their persuasiveness. As for hoping that the elders of the Di family would stand up for him, that was impossible. The Di family had come to the White Deer Institute to build a good relationship with them. If he couldn't even handle his own matters, why would the elders of the Di family bully a guest of the White Deer Institute, Qin Wenyan? Di Cheng could only admit defeat. Qin Wenyan and Bailu Yi lifted their feet, preparing to leave. But before they could take a few steps, a gust of cold wind gusted over. Abruptly, another silhouette appeared, blocking Qin Wenyan and Bailu Yi's path. Upon seeing this silhouette, Qin Wentian's countenance stiffened. What was going on today? Di Cheng blocked their path, and now, there was another person blocking their path. Not only that, the person standing in front of him was actually an elder of the White Deer Institute. Although he didn't know who this person was, he had seen him a few times before. Grandpa Dong, what's wrong? Bailu Yi froze as she stared at the old man in front of her. Grandpa Tong was her elder, of the same generation as her grandfather. He was one of the 9 elders of the White Deer Institute, and could be considered as someone with great authority in the institute. His attainments in the Tao of divine inscriptions were extremely high, and he was a 4th-ranked grandmaster as well as a 4th-ranked divine inscriptionist. Not only that, he was also a heavenly dipper sovereign. Little brother Qin, I want to borrow something from you. Bailu Tong's eyes shone brightly as he stared at Qin Wenyan. Qin Wenyan politely replied, What item does senior want to borrow? The ancient scroll of the gold element ascendant. As the sound of Bailu Tong's voice faded, Qin Wentian's eyes narrowed as he involuntarily turned his gaze onto Bailu. Had the news of what happened in the secret realm already circulated out? Before this, he had heard from Bailu Yi that those from the transcendent powers had all kept their mouths shut. Nobody in the outside world knew what happened in the secret realm. At this moment, Bailu Yi was also stunned. She didn't expect that Bailu Tong would ask Qin Wenyan for this. The ancient scroll of the gold element ascendant was incomparably valuable. Qin Wenyan had given it to her because their relationship was extraordinary and because he trusted her. However, Bailu Tong and Qin Wenyan didn't have any interactions at all. Asking for such a valuable item out of the blue, no one would be happy, including Qin Wenyin. When Bai Lu Tong saw the expressions on their faces, he instantly understood that the ancient scroll of the gold element ascendant was most probably in Qin Wentian's hands. I heard that little brother Qin had some good fortune in the secret realm and obtained the ancient scroll of the gold element ascendant. I have some knowledge in the field of divine inscriptions, and would little brother Qin please lend it to me to take a look? Bai Lu Tong continued. A golden light flickered in Qin Wentian's eyes. What status did Bai Lu Tong have? How valuable was the ancient scroll of the gold element ascendant? Although Bai Lu Tong said that he wanted to borrow it, in truth, it was a form of robbery. Senior must be joking. Junior's cultivation base is too low. How could I obtain the ancient scroll of the gold element ascendant in the secret realm? Qin Wendian stared into Bai Lu Tong's eyes as he casually laughed. Even if Bai Lu Tong knew, he wouldn't admit to it. The ancient scroll of the gold element ascendant had too many implications, and there was a high possibility that it would attract calamity. Regardless of whether others knew of it or not, he couldn't admit to it no matter what. Is that so? But the information I received shouldn't be wrong. Bai Lu Tong similarly stared at Qin Wendian as he laughed. Treasures could bring calamity to people's hearts. If it wasn't for the fact that Qin Wendian had a good relationship with Bai Lu Yi and was a guest of the White Deer Institute, Bai Lu Tong wouldn't have wasted so much time talking nonsense with him and would have directly acted to snatch it away. Snatching treasures was a very common thing in the martial arts world. Senior must be mistaken. Qin Wendian continued laughing. At this moment, Bai Lu Yi and Bai Lu Jing definitely wouldn't leak the news out. Even if they did, the first person to receive the news wouldn't be Bai Lu Tong. In that case, it could only be those young men from the transcendent powers who intentionally leaked the news. Since this is the case, little brother Qin, can you allow me to inspect your interspatial ring? Bai Lu Tong stared at the interspatial ring on Qin Wentian's finger. Such words were already extremely presumptuous. Who didn't have their own secrets? The interspatial ring was Wu Xiu's foundation. How could he allow others to inspect it? Grandpa Tong, you're going too far, Bai Lu Yi retorted. Although Bai Lu Tong was an elder, it was still too much to be so overbearing. Little Yi, this matter has nothing to do with you, Bai Lu Tong interjected. If it wasn't for Bai Lu Yi, he wouldn't have been so polite to Qin Wendian. You actually think that this has nothing to do with me? Bai Lu Yi's voice was filled with mockery. Her hand was still holding onto Qin Wentian's arm. You should understand the importance of the ancient scroll. Now that it's right in front of me, Grandpa Tong has to obtain it no matter what. Bai Lu Tong stared straight into Bai Lu Yi's eyes as he spoke with a voice that could sever nails and sever iron. Bai Lu Tong, enough. At this moment, a silhouette walked over from afar. It was none other than the large-eyed elder whom Qin Wendian had met before. Bai Lu Tong's countenance didn't change when he saw the large-eyed elder. As a divine inscriptionist, the ancient scroll of the Ascendant was right in front of him. Such temptation was simply irresistible. Grand Elder. I've said enough. The large-eyed elder reprimanded. Don't forget, not long ago, Qin Wendian was still fighting for our White Deer Institute's ranking in the refinement grounds. Bai Lu Tong flicked his sleeves and departed. Evidently, he wouldn't let this matter rest so easily. Many thanks, Grand Elder. Qin Wendian clasped his hands to the large-eyed elder. You are a guest of the White Deer Institute. This is something I should do. If I've offended you in any way, please don't take it to heart, the large-eyed elder replied. After which, he turned to Bai Lu, Little E, take good care of little brother Qin. Bai Lu Yi nodded her head in agreement, before leading Qin Wendian away. Qin Wendian once again returned to the grassy area behind the mountain. This place was quiet and tranquil, with a gentle breeze caressing his face, causing him to feel a sense of tranquility. Qin Wendian sat on the ground, staring at little rascal's snow-white body as a smile appeared on Qin Wentian's face. Stretching out his right hand, a sharp sword light appeared in his left hand, slicing through his palm, causing fresh blood to drip down. Little rascal, open your mouth, Qin Wendian spoke to little rascal. Yeah. Little rascal shook its head, An expression of extreme reluctance could be seen in its adorable eyes, as though it was angrily glaring at Qin Wenin. Back then when you followed me, you must have sensed my aura when you met me. I know that my blood is useful to you, and even if I lose a bit of blood, there won't be any side effects. I'll replenish it very quickly. Don't worry. Qin Wenin knew that one of his bloodlines was the terrifying demonic blood, and was extremely useful to demonic beasts. Upon hearing Qin Wentian's words, Little Rascal opened its mouth. Be good. Qin Wenin dripped a drop of blood into Little Rascal's mouth, and indeed, an instant later, a golden light flickered in its eyes as it ran to the side to sleep. Someone might have intentionally leaked the news, aren't you worried at all? Bai Lu Yi stared at the relaxed expression on Qin Wentian's face. Bai Lu Tong intercepting Qin Wentian had caused her to feel a sense of pressure. Even an elder of the Bai Lu Academy felt this way, let alone an outsider. Treasures bring calamity to people's hearts. What's the use of worrying? The only thing I can do is to grow stronger. Qin Wentian mumbled. Bai Lu Yi nodded her head. You're right, although the predicament you're in might seem complicated, it's all because you're still too young and your strength isn't strong enough. What did you say? Qin Wentian's eyes abruptly lit up, staring at Qin Wenin. Bai Lu Yi stared at the expression on Qin Wentian's face. Bewilderment could be seen on her face. Qin Wenin didn't seem like someone who would get angry, right? You're still too young, and your strength isn't strong enough. If you could intimidate them, you wouldn't be in this predicament today, Bai Lu Yi repeated. The previous sentence. Qin Wentian's heart pounded. Although the predicament you're in might seem complicated, it's all about simplicity, Bai Lu Yi murmured, not understanding Qin Wentian's meaning. Yes, although the predicament you're in might seem complicated, it's all about simplicity. Qin Wentian drew in a deep breath, feeling enlightened. He inclined his head, feeling the cool breeze blowing against his face, as he felt a sense of enlightenment. From simplicity to complexity, that's refinement. From complexity to simplicity, that's comprehension, Qin Wentian mumbled. Bai Lu Yi's beautiful eyes flickered. She was completely at a loss. Only to see Qin Wentian squatting down, his palms slashing out in front of him. Instantly, a straight line streaked through the air, containing a surge of energy within it. Bai Lu Yi stared at the streak of light, her heart filled with bewilderment. She walked forward and similarly squatted down, infusing a strand of astral energy into it. Instantly, a terrifying sharpness gushed forth as a beam of sword light pierced through the air, startling Bai Lu Yi so much that she fell to the ground. Her beautiful eyes stared in shock at Qin Wenin as she stared at him. You broke through. Bai Lu Yi's heart trembled, her voice filled with excitement. Qin Wenin smiled as he nodded his head, exuding a carefree air. The confidence radiating from him grew even stronger. Chapter 279. Bai Lu Yi's heart pounded wildly, her beautiful eyes unblinkingly fixed on Qin Wenin. Fourth level. Bai Lu Yi's sexy lips twitched, her voice trembling slightly. In the Moon continent, fourth-ranked inscriptionists were at least in their 40s or 50s, and there were even some who were over 100 years old. These dazzling geniuses preferred to spend most of their time on the path of cultivation, and hence, there weren't that many demon-level inscriptionists. Qin Wenin was definitely one of a kind. He already had extraordinary attainments in the path of cultivation, and his talent in the Tao of divine inscriptions was even more monstrous. Not yet. Qin Wentian laughed. Bai Lu Yi lightly patted her chest upon hearing his words. She didn't know how seductive this action was to men. Then why are you trying to scare me? Bai Lu Yi glared at Qin Wenin. What grade of divine inscription is this? Qin Wenin laughed as he pointed to the inscription that appeared to be a straight line, but was actually imbued with a powerful sword might. Third-ranked. Bai Lu Yi stared at Qin Wenin. Although he hadn't broken through to the fourth-ranked inscriptionist realm, the fact that he had such an achievement was already an astonishing feat. How many people could inscribe third-ranked inscriptions with just a lift of their hands? Even fourth-ranked inscriptionists couldn't do so. Inscribing third-ranked inscriptions with just a lift of your hands is indeed a major breakthrough. Bai Lu Yi smiled. You've reminded me from complexity to simplicity. Qin Wenyan laughed. Before this, from the simplest divine inscription all the way up to the third level, the process of inscribing the divine inscriptions from the simplest to the complex. One stroke at a time, and more strokes at the end, the divine inscriptions would intertwine with each other, forming a brand new divine inscription. But now, if I want to step into the fourth level, the difficulty of inscribing a fourth-level divine inscription would be unimaginable. But of course, this is a stage that all divine inscriptionists have to go through. Isn't it the same for all divine inscriptionists? The inscribing of divine inscriptions is already exceedingly difficult. This is also the reason why so many geniuses are willing to cultivate. Although fourth-ranked inscriptionists are equivalent to heavenly dipper sovereigns, it's an undeniable fact that heavenly dipper sovereigns can easily kill fourth-ranked inscriptionists. Others wouldn't wait for you to slowly inscribe fourth-ranked inscriptions. Qin Wenyan naturally understood this logic. This was also the reason Di Qing used to humiliate him. If not, with his attainments in the Tao of inscriptions at the peak of the third-ranked, he was already equivalent to someone at the peak of Yuanfu. Martial Tao and divine inscriptions couldn't be compared directly. However, this wouldn't affect the respect of powerful divine inscriptionists. A fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist meant that they had the ability to inscribe fourth-ranked formations and forge fourth-ranked divine weapons. As such, there would be many people who would seek help from them, including heavenly dipper sovereigns. On the path of martial Tao, there are countless transformations. Everyone has their own methods of cultivation, and the Tao of divine inscriptions is the same as well. Others have their own methods of cultivation, but I have my own philosophy. From complexity to simplicity, this is what I've comprehended. Although I haven't stepped into the fourth-ranked divine inscriptions yet, it's only a matter of time before I succeed. Qin Wenyan smiled. His path in the Tao of divine inscriptions was closely related to the spirit refinement method he cultivated. The spirit refinement method borrowed the power of divine inscriptions to condense divine energy. For the first level of the spirit refinement method, one would be able to condense any first-ranked divine energy in an instant. For the second level of the spirit refinement method, one would be able to condense any second-ranked divine energy in an instant. Currently, although Qin Wenyan hadn't reached the level where he could condense any third-ranked divine energy in an instant, he could at least condense some simple third-ranked divine energy in an instant. This indicated that his spirit refinement method had already reached the third level of the spirit refinement method, and was only a sliver away from the perfection boundary. The spirit refinement method was the foundation of his current attainments in the Tao of divine inscriptions. Does this mean that you'll be able to step into the fourth-ranked soon? Since I've comprehended it, the fourth-ranked divine inscriptions is only a matter of time. With a single thought, it shouldn't be too difficult for me to break through to the fourth-ranked. Qin Wenyan laughed, causing Bai Lu Yi's heart to palpitate once more. A 19-year-old fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist? Just thinking about it caused her heart to thump wildly. I have to go into closed-door seclusion again. Qin Wenyan bitterly smiled. Although he valued the martial path more than the Tao of divine inscriptions, the Tao of divine inscriptions would allow him to gain the recognition of the White Deer Institute within a short period of time. Hence, he could only choose to break through to the fourth-ranked divine inscriptions first. In that case, even though he wasn't even 19 years of age, his status wouldn't be inferior to many of the heavenly rankers on the heavenly fate rankings. The White Deer Institute would also view him in a new light, valuing him from the bottom of their hearts. Okay, do your best in closed-door seclusion. You must definitely break through, okay? Bai Lu Yi raised her dainty fist to Qin Wenyan, her innocent smile exceptionally beautiful. As long as you step into the fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist realm, the weight of the Azure Emperor medallion will be even greater. Qin Wenyan smiled as he nodded his head. The weight of the Azure Emperor medallion from a fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist and that of a fourth-level Yuanfu cultivator were on two completely different levels. Bai Lu Yi lifted her hands and clenched them into fists. Qin Wenyan, upon seeing her actions, did the same as well. After which, their fists lightly bumped into each other as they exchanged a smile. after which Bai Lu departed. Qin Wenyan drew in a deep breath as he sat down cross-legged. Time was of the essence. He had to take out the Azure Emperor medallion before the White Deer Institute fully recognized Di Feng. If not, once the faction represented by Di Feng gained the support of the White Deer Institute, everything would be too late. In the quiet back mountain, the grass was lush and green. Sunlight, rain and dew, as well as a light breeze, nourished the soil. A young man sat there quietly, as though he was isolated from the rest of the world. Nothing could disturb his heart. Beside the young man, a snow-white puppy was sitting cross-legged like the young man, looking extremely adorable. However, what was even more shocking was that every time night fell, the snow-white puppy would quietly lie down on the ground. From the heavens above, starlight would cascade into its body, causing its body to glow with a golden light. During the day, the puppy would get up and run around, occasionally sticking out its tongue and licking the pants of the young man. It was as though the young man was its kin. Chu Mang and Fan Lu had always been active in the various locations of the Moon continent. The Hell Arena had become a training ground for them, and there were times when they would meet with ruthless opponents, causing them to be in a life-or-death situation. However, as they continued to temper themselves, their combat prowess grew stronger and stronger. Chu Mang's cultivation base had long stepped into the 6th level of Yuanfu, while Fan Lu had already stepped into the 4th level of Yuanfu. Chu Mang and Fan Lu would often spar against each other. Although Fan Li's cultivation base was inferior to Chu Mang's, the power of his bloodline had grown stronger and stronger. Hence, he was able to spar against Chu Mang, and in addition to the fact that both of them were proficient in archery, they would often spar against each other. The Moon continent was indeed much more interesting compared to a small country like Chu. Many things happened in the Moon continent during this period of time. There was news that a young man named Qin Wenyan had entered the secret grounds of divine inscriptions together with the star-seizing manner, and under a stroke of good fortune, he managed to obtain the ancient scroll of the Ascendant of the Ascendant. As this news circulated, it instantly caused a huge wave of commotion. Many powerful 4th-ranked grandmasters all had their own ideas. The Gold Element Ascendant was a legendary expert, and he was also a terrifying 5th-ranked grandmaster. One could very well imagine how attractive the ancient scroll of divine inscriptions he inherited was to 4th-ranked grandmasters. After which, when they found out that Qin Wenyan was in the White Deer Institute, many of them were disappointed. The White Deer Institute was a major power that was extremely proficient in the Tao of divine inscriptions. Since Qin Wenyan was in the White Deer Institute, the ancient scroll of divine inscriptions must have already fallen into their hands. After their investigations, they discovered that Qin Wenyan had never stepped out of the White Deer Institute. It was very likely that he was under house arrest. And while the gazes of many in the Moon continent were on Qin Wenyan, he was still in the back mountains of the White Deer Institute. Today, in the White Deer Institute, Bai Lu Yu and 2 other young men were heading towards the back mountains. However, at the foot of the mountain, they were obstructed by Bai Lu. "Little E, what do you mean by this?" Bai Lu Yu spoke to Bai Lu Yi, his countenance filled with unhappiness. "Uncle Yu, I know what you are doing. He's currently in closed-door seclusion. It's not a good time to disturb him." Bai Lu Yi stared at Bai Lu Yu. Bai Lu Yu was the eldest son of Bai Lu Tong and had some attainments in the Tao of divine inscriptions. However, his attainments in the Tao of divine inscriptions weren't very high. "Since when did the back mountains of my White Deer Institute become occupied by an outsider? Why can't I go there?" Bai Lu Yu coldly laughed. "Not only that, I'm not the one looking for him today. There are quite a few guests who wish to meet with Qin Wenyan. You should know who these guests are, right?" "He won't meet with them," Bai Lu Yi confidently replied. She naturally knew who these people were. Recently, there were quite a few 4th-ranked grandmasters who came to the White Deer Institute, wanting to meet with Qin Wenyan. The White Deer Institute didn't reject them. The status of a 4th-ranked grandmaster was already extraordinary, and in addition to the fact that there were some people who wanted to make use of the pressure from the outside world to threaten Qin Wenyan, how could she not understand? With so many important characters here, as long as the White Deer Institute gave up on Qin Wenyan, he would be in an extremely dangerous situation outside. Cooperating with the White Deer Institute and handing over the treasure to them was undoubtedly the best choice. Is that so? Little E, is your friend really so arrogant? He doesn't even want to meet with a fourth-ranked grandmaster? Bailu Yu coldly laughed. Even if he doesn't want to meet with me, he should be the one to answer me personally. After speaking, Bailu Yu continued walking forwards. Bailu Yi's beautiful eyes flashed as her silhouette flickered, blocking Bailu Yu's path. Impudent! Bailu Yu coldly snorted as his aura gushed forth. It was as though he no longer cared about face. Even if he had to make a move, he still wanted to meet with that person in the back mountains. Bailu Yi's beautiful eyes turned ashen, extremely unsightly to behold. Since Senior wishes to meet with me, feel free to do so. An ethereal voice drifted over from the back mountains, causing Bailu Yi's beautiful eyes to freeze. The owner of this voice was someone she was too familiar with. Chapter 280. Bailu Yu smiled at Bailu Yi before walking out. Bailu Yi naturally stepped aside and followed behind Bailu Yu, arriving at the back of the mountain. On the grassy hillside, Qin Wenyan sat cross-legged. Upon seeing Bailu Yu, he couldn't help but smile. Does Senior have any instructions for me? Grandmaster Qin, it's so difficult to even meet you. Bailu Yu exclaimed in a loud voice. The way he addressed Qin Wenyan as Grandmaster Qin contained hints of mockery. Senior must be joking. It's just that Junior has been in closed-door seclusion these few days. Little E was worried that I would be disturbed, hence she stopped Senior. If she offended you in any way, please forgive her. Qin Wenyan still had a smile on his face, ignoring Bailu Yu's sarcasm. As the saying goes, no one would slap a smiling face. However, Bailu Yu continued, Grandmaster Qin is in closed-door seclusion? Could it be that you've already broken through to the fourth-ranked? Why can't we meet? Qin Wenyan continued smiling, not replying. Bailu Yu couldn't help but to add, currently, there are many guests visiting my White Deer Institute, and among them, there are even fourth-ranked grandmasters. Grandmaster Qin, would you be willing to give us the face to meet with them? Qin Wenyan's expression turned solemn. Qin, don't know anyone in the Moon continent. Why would there be people wanting to pay a visit? Qin Wenyan curiously asked. As the sound of his voice faded, an expression of interest appeared on Bailu Yu's face, laughing at Qin Wenyan for not knowing the immensity of the heavens and earth. He even dared to use the word, pay a visit. Not, pay a visit, I'm asking you to meet them. Bailu Yu emphasized the word, pay a visit. Qin Wenyan nodded, after which he fell silent. These grandmasters really came at the right time. He glanced at Bailu Yi, and upon seeing the worried expression on her face, he instantly understood. Most probably, this was because of the ancient scroll. If not, there wouldn't be any fourth-ranked grandmasters wanting to meet with him. Bailu Yu couldn't help but to continue mocking Qin Wenyan. Grandmaster Qin, are you still not preparing to move? Why must we move? Qin Wenyan had a strange expression on his face as he stared at Bailu Yu. Bailu Yu's gaze froze as he stared at Qin Wenyan. There are so many fourth-ranked grandmasters wanting to meet with you. Tell me, why did you make a move? Could it be that you want all of them to meet with you? Bailu Yu's tone had already turned cold, yet Bailu Yi sarcastically interjected, Uncle Yu, I'm sure you're very clear of the reason why they want to meet with Qin Wenyan. Why do you still want to come here personally to persuade them? Bailu Yu's motive was extremely clear. He wanted Qin Wenyan to meet with those people, and after that, he wanted Qin Wenyan to feel the pressure of the outside world. Only then would Qin Wenyan submit to his father, Bailu Tong, in order to protect himself. Bailu Yu coldly snorted, Lobbyist? I'm only here to inform him. What do you mean by lobbyist? Could it be that he wants to avoid meeting with all the grandmasters? Senior must be joking. Why would I, Qin, avoid meeting with them? Qin Wenyan faintly replied, the smile on his face gradually vanishing. Bailu Yu coldly laughed as he glanced at Qin Wenyan. If they don't want to meet, they don't want to meet. What's there to avoid? Qin Wenyan continued. The cold smile on Bailu Yu's face froze as he stared at Qin Wenyan, only to see Qin Wenyan continuing, Senior, you've already said it yourself. It's them who want to meet with me, not me, the other way round. Bai Luyu stared at Qin Wenin. What an interesting fellow. Do you mean that you want all the grandmasters to pay their respects to you? Bai Luyu teased. I don't dare to use the word, pay their respects. Qin Wenin shook his head. It's just that Senior only said that there's a 4th-ranked grandmaster who wishes to meet with me. Firstly, you didn't mention the name of that grandmaster, and secondly, you didn't even mention the reason why he wants to meet with me. I don't have anything to ask of them, nor have I received any favors from them. If I do that, wouldn't I be belittling myself? Could it be that Senior likes to belittle himself in this manner? Bai Luyu's eyes narrowed as he laughed. You have a sharp tongue. Since that's the case, I shall inform the other grandmasters and tell them to pay their respects to Grandmaster Qin. As the sound of his voice faded, Bai Luyu flicked his sleeves and departed. The young man behind him swept his gaze over to Qin Wenin, his eyes gleaming with sharpness. After the three of them left, Bai Luyi's beautiful eyes flickered with worry. She turned to Qin Wenin. During the time you were in closed-door seclusion, there were rumors circulating that you obtained the ancient scroll of the Ascendant. Bai Luyu is the son of Bai Lu Tong, and I'm sure you're very clear of his motive for coming here. Today, a group of grandmasters came here, and they're extremely ferocious. Qin Wenin nodded his head lightly as he stood up. Seeing the haggard look on Bai Luyi's face, he couldn't help but smile. Don't worry if they go too far, I won't let them off easy. Bai Luyi's beautiful eyes brightened as she stared at the smile on Qin Wentian's face. Did you really break through this time around? Qin Wentian smiled as he nodded his head. Really? Bai Luyi asked again. Qin Wenin nodded his head again. 4th ranked, you're not lying to me? Bai Luyi asked again, the light in her eyes growing brighter and brighter. 4th ranked, a 19-year-old 4th-ranked grandmaster. Qin Wenin rolled his eyes as he walked over and rapped Bai Luyi on her head. Absolutely true, I'm not lying to you. That's great. Bai Luyi's countenance was filled with excitement. She couldn't help but jump up as she hugged Qin Wenin tightly. Heavens, I've actually seen a 19-year-old 4th-ranked grandmaster with my own eyes. Is he going to create history in the Moon continent? This is too crazy, Qin Wenin, you're too crazy. Qin Wenin didn't expect Bai Luyi to be so excited. Feeling the softness on his arm, Qin Wentian's eyes stared unblinkingly at the pure and innocent girl. As though sensing Qin Wentian's gaze, Bai Luyi froze for a moment. Her beautiful eyes flickered as she glanced down at her own body leaning on Qin Wentian's arm. Instantly, a blush appeared on her face. Coupled with that pure and innocent countenance of hers, it caused Qin Wenin to stare in a daze. Although he was already used to beauties, the pure and innocent Bai Luyi in front of him right now was simply too beautiful. The excitement in her eyes was pure and without any impurities. Wait here, I'll help you blow things up a little more. Bai Luyi's eyes lit up as she sprinted away. As though sensing something, Bai Luyi rubbed her temples as she turned back to glare at Qin Wenin. Bastard, how could you be so strong? Only now did I realize. Qin Wenin was completely speechless. After which, he only saw Bai Luyi smiling sweetly at him as she sped away. Blow things up a little more? Qin Wenin blinked his eyes as he stared at the graceful silhouette of Bai Luyi. This lass really wanted to see the world in chaos. Not long after, Qin Wenin saw a group of silhouettes flying over. Many of these people had white hair and white beards, exuding an air of immortality. There were also a few who had amiable expressions on their faces, their eyes gleaming with sharpness. However, regardless of their external appearances, the aura they exuded was the same arrogance. Powerful divine inscriptionists had always been worshipped and respected by others. The major powers of the Yuanfu continent were all willing to pay a hefty price to nurture them, as long as they were willing. 4th-ranked divine inscriptionists would never lack wealth, nor would they lack fame. No matter where they went, they would be like the moon surrounded by stars. Even now, there were several old men with cultivation bases at the upper 3rd level of Yuanfu standing behind them, protecting them. For those with limited achievements in the martial path, If they had talent in the Tao of divine inscriptions, they would spend a large amount of time researching divine inscriptions. Hence, even if they were fourth-ranked divine inscriptionists, they might only have a cultivation base at the Yuanfu realm. Hence, they needed guards, and naturally, there would be people willing to be their guards. It was inevitable that they would be filled with arrogance. When they appeared in front of Qin Wenyin could clearly feel the intense aura exuded by these divine inscriptionists. 2 of them are heavenly dipper sovereigns, while the rest are all at the Yuanfu realm. The weakest among them is only at the 5th level of Yuanfu. Qin Wenyin swept his gaze over, instantly knowing the cultivation bases of these people. He could tell that they were at the Yuanfu realm, but he couldn't tell that they were at the Yuanfu realm. One of the heavenly dipper sovereigns was someone that Qin Wenyin was acquainted with. Senior pays his respects to Grandmaster Fenrir. Qin Wenyin politely bowed to one of the heavenly dipper sovereigns. Back then, during the exchange in the star-seizing manner, it was none other than Grandmaster Fenrir who was the judge. Grandmaster Fenrir smiled as he nodded his head. His gaze was fixed on Qin Wentian's surroundings as a sharp glint flickered in his eyes. His heart pounded violently, as though he had just seen something extremely shocking. Back then, when we parted at the star-seizing manor, I could already tell that you were an extraordinary individual. Now, you've truly met with a heaven-sent opportunity. Naturally, this opportunity was also obtained through your own hard work. Congratulations. Grandmaster Fenrir smiled and nodded to Qin Wenyin, treating him with respect. His tone was calm, and there was no hint of arrogance in it. Qin Wenyin could easily sense the closeness radiating from Grandmaster Fenrir. He also understood the meaning behind Grandmaster Fenrir's words. He smiled and nodded his head in reply. Junior's luck isn't bad. Back then, when Grandmaster Fenrir imparted the divine inscriptions to me, Junior also benefited greatly from it. After speaking, Qin Wenyin bowed again, appearing extremely sincere. Grandmaster Fenrir smiled as he nodded his head. He shifted his feet slightly to the side, as though he was intentionally putting some distance between himself and the others. Yet in his heart, he couldn't help but sigh. This young man was definitely not an ordinary individual. In the future, he would definitely transform into a dragon that soared to the 9 heavens. Right now, he could only befriend Qin Wenyin and not offend him. However, the others didn't notice Grandmaster Fenrir's casual actions. They also didn't understand the deep meaning behind his simple words. Not only that, some of them even thought that Grandmaster Fenrir was hinting that Qin Wenyin had obtained the Ascendant's inheritance. And Qin Wenyin had actually admitted it. As such, the light in their eyes grew even brighter as they stared at Qin Wenyin. The way they looked at Qin Wenyin was as though they were looking at their prey. The inheritance of the Ascendant, today, they had to force this brat to hand it over. Chapter 281. Swords drawn and bows bent. This was the perfect word to describe the situation Qin Wenyin was currently facing. Bai Lu Yu had also arrived. He was the one who brought these grandmasters here. However, he had an ulterior motive. He didn't wish for Qin Wenyin to hand over the ancient scroll. He only wanted to make Qin Wenyin feel pressured. When Qin Wenyin couldn't withstand the pressure, he would naturally give Qin Wenyin a chance. Hence, Bai Lu Yu merely stood at the side, a cold smile curling his lips. In such a situation, he wanted to see how Qin Wenyin would handle it. But at this moment, the sound of footsteps drifted over. Bai Lu Yu turned his head, only to see a group of people walking over. He couldn't help but be stunned. It was actually the Great Elder, Bai Lu Yi, Bai Lu Shan and Bai Lu Jing. This lass, did she think that by bringing the Great Elder here, she would be able to help Qin Wenyin? Bai Lu Yu naturally knew that this was Bai Lu Yi's doing. He bowed slightly to the large-eyed elder as he called out, "Great Elder." The large-eyed elder casually nodded his head, yet his heart was filled with bewilderment. Bai Lu Yi had told him that there would be a good show to watch here, hence, he decided to follow her here. "Father." Bai Lu Yu suddenly noticed Bai Lu Tong also walking over. Bai Lu Tong nodded his head lightly as he glanced at the large-eyed elder. He knew that the Great Elder would be here, hence he decided to follow along. He wouldn't allow Bai Lu Yi to spoil his plans. The other grandmasters didn't rush to speak. They remained silent for a moment, and upon seeing that the large-eyed elder and Bailu Tong had no intention to speak, many thoughts flashed through their minds. They weren't in a hurry, so Qin Wenyan wasn't in a hurry as well. He simply stood there quietly. However, with so many seniors trying to force him to abdicate, how could he not be in a good mood? Finally, an old man with sunken eyes and a high-nose bridge was the first to lose his cool. He stared at Qin Wenyan with narrowed eyes akin to a venomous snake, causing Qin Wenyan to feel extremely uncomfortable. Qin Wenyan. This old man had a cultivation base at the 7th level of Yuanfu, and behind him were 3 guards at the 9th level of Yuanfu. His eyes narrowed as he coldly laughed. "You want us to come here personally to see you? This is the first time I've seen someone as arrogant as you." "Senior, you must be joking." Qin Wenyan pointed at the path behind the old man and smiled. "What do you mean?" The other party stared at Qin Wenyan. "I didn't mean for Senior to come and see me. I think Senior must have misunderstood. The main road is there, Senior." Qin Wenyan smiled and pointed to the road ahead. What he meant was obvious. "Senior, you must be joking. I didn't ask you to come to see me. You came to see me yourself. If you don't want to see me, the road is right there. Go ahead." "You." How could the other party not understand the meaning behind Qin Wenyan's words? His sunken eyes deepened, and a cold glint burst forth from them. Sharp-tongued. "You wanted us to come here, but now you want me to leave just like that? Isn't this too ridiculous? You overestimate yourself too much." The other party continued. Qin Wenyan's eyes flashed with sharpness when he heard the other party's words. "Are you crazy?" As the sound of Qin Wenyan's voice faded, the expression of the old man stiffened. Did the other party just say that he was crazy in public? Ever since he stepped into the ranks of 4th-ranked divine inscriptionists, he had never been humiliated before. Behind him, 3 silhouettes stepped out, exuding a terrifying aura as they gushed towards Qin Wenyan. As long as the old man gave the order, they would immediately act against Qin Wenyan. "I'll give you a chance to apologize." The countenance of the old man turned ice-cold, so cold that it pierced into the bones. It was still too early for the contest over the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, but now he wanted an explanation from Qin Wenyan. "Seems like not only are you crazy, your sickness isn't light at all." The smile on Qin Wenyan's face faded. His eyes swept over to the newcomers as his gaze gradually turned sharp. How could he not be angered by these people? But since they were all divine inscriptionists, he might as well try to be polite before resorting to violence. Since the other party wasn't going to be polite, what did he, Qin Wenyan, have to fear? Impudent! The 3 of them roared in rage as they took a step forward. However, Qin Wenyan only spoke. "If you take another step forward, I'll kill you." As the sound of the word, kill, faded, a bone-chilling killing intent gushed forth from Qin Wenyan, causing the entire space to be filled with a bone-chilling killing intent. The hearts of the 3 involuntarily shuddered when they saw Qin Wenyan's gaze sweeping over. Even with their cultivation bases, they could feel a terrifying coldness from Qin Wenyan's eyes. It was as though the sharpness of a blade was slicing through their minds, piercing into their bones. As the sound of Qin Wenyan's voice faded, the entire hillside instantly fell into silence. A light breeze gusted by, causing the green grass on the ground to sway lightly, only to see Qin Wenyan staring at the 4th-ranked divine inscriptionist. Each and every one of his gazes was akin to a cold blade, piercing into the eyes of the 4th-ranked divine inscriptionist. "I've already given you face by addressing you as senior, yet you don't know how to conduct yourself. Since you don't want to listen to my kind words, I, Qin, will repeat my intentions one more time." Qin Wenyan coldly continued, "I, Qin Wenyan, am cultivating here. You can come and go as you please. What does this have to do with me? Please don't use the tone of, 'I invited you here,' to speak to me. Firstly, I, Qin, am not your junior, and secondly, I have nothing to ask of you. Why would I invite you here? If you have nothing else to say, just scram." The domineering tone of Qin Wenyan's words caused the people in the surroundings to be stunned, as their eyes flickered with uncertainty. Arrogance, truly arrogance. Although there was some logic in Qin Wentian's words, in this world, the strong reigned supreme. Who wouldn't respect a fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist? Yet he, Qin Wenin, directly told the divine inscriptionist that he was the one who came to see him, not the one who invited him here. If you have nothing else to say, just scram. One could say that the words spoken by Qin Wenin had completely offended a fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist. Even if Qin Wenin was fine today, if a fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist wanted to deal with a Yuanfu cultivator like Qin Wenin, it would be too much for him to handle. The large-eyed elder was also baffled by Qin Wentian's words. Where did this little fellow's self-confidence come from? Glancing at Bai Lu Yi beside him, Bai Lu Yi's beautiful eyes flickered with a strange light, as though she was at ease. Her confidence in Qin Wentian didn't seem to be any less than Qin Wentian himself. Grandmaster Fenrir, on the other hand, had a smile on his face. He didn't say anything as he quietly watched the development unfold. He also wanted to see how Qin Wentian would deal with the situation today. As for the high-nosed elder, his countenance turned extremely sinister after hearing Qin Wentian's words. If there's nothing else, just scram? Was this something a first-ranked Yuanfu cultivator would say to him? If he took another step forward, he would die? Where did his confidence come from? Maybe he had obtained the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, allowing him to inscribe top-tier third-ranked divine inscriptions as well as formations. However, with him here, did Qin Wenin really think that he could borrow the power of formations or divine inscriptions to kill his follower? Brother Liang, the temper of the youngsters these days is really bad. A black-faced middle-aged man laughed. Brother Liang was none other than the high-nosed elder. If it wasn't for the fact that we are in the White Deer Institute, given Brother Liang's temper, he would have died 10 times over. The black-faced middle-aged man continued. The high-nosed elder narrowed his eyes. Regardless of whether they were in the White Deer Institute or not, why would they waste so much time talking nonsense with Qin Wenin? They would directly kill him and seize the ancient scroll. But now, they all understood that since the White Deer Institute allowed them to enter, it meant that the White Deer Institute had yet to force Qin Wenin to hand over the ancient scroll. Similarly, the White Deer Institute wanted to use them to threaten Qin Wenin. Hence, these people temporarily decided to wait and see. The high-nosed elder surnamed Liang was the most impatient of them all. Hence, he took the initiative to make things difficult for Qin Wenin. Indeed, this brat doesn't respect his seniors, he should be punished for his rudeness. Another person spoke. This person stroked his white beard, exuding an air of immortality. This old man was already over 150 years old and had immersed himself in the study of divine inscriptions for a long time. He had also stepped into the fourth-ranked divine inscriptionist realm for quite a few years, and there were many who knew him in the Moon Continent. Many divine inscriptionists had received his guidance before. Hence, this old man was someone of virtue and prestige. That's what Old Song said as well. The black-faced middle-aged man laughed. The high-nosed elder glanced at Old Song. Old Song, how should we punish this brat? Does Fenrir have any opinions? Old Song stroked his beard as he turned his gaze onto Grandmaster Fenrir. Don't ask me. Back then, I had a friendly encounter with him. Today, I'm only here to take a look. I won't interfere in your matters. Fenrir smiled as he waved his hands, not getting involved in this matter. Qin Wenin was brimming with confidence. He must have already made preparations. He was more than happy to watch the show. In that case, the ancient scroll of the Ascendant? Old Song placed his hand on his beard, his eyes gleaming with sharpness. That has nothing to do with me. If you guys can obtain it, just go ahead. Fenrir waved his hands. Good. Old Song stroked his beard as he laughed. They had one less strong opponent. This brat was so disrespectful to Grandmaster Liang and the other Grandmasters. He deserves death. At this moment, a voice drifted over from the back of the crowd. The black-faced middle-aged man smiled. Gauze, it seems like you have some ideas. I've long recognized this brat. He doesn't respect his elders, and has the ambition of a wolf. If he were to obtain the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, it would be a waste of a heavenly treasure. This brat deserves death, and I'm sure the White Deer Institute won't hold it against him. Gauze's voice was ice-cold. Gauze, how shameless can you be? Bai Lu cursed as she turned her gaze onto Gauze. Back then, he had some grudges with Qin Wenyan, but Qin Wenyan didn't hold it against him. Yet now, Gauze actually wanted these people to kill Qin Wenyan. How ruthless! Miss Bai Lu, it seems like your heart aches for your lover. But I, Gauze, believe that the White Deer Institute will understand right from wrong. Gauze wasn't angered, he casually laughed. The crowd shifted their gazes onto the large-eyed elder and Bai Lu Tong, as though they had already discussed how to deal with Qin Wenyan. Next, they just had to wait for the White Deer Institute to express their stance. Bai Lu Tong's gaze shifted onto Qin Wenyan as he coldly stated, "That will depend on what he chooses." Evidently, Bai Lu Tong wanted to push the pressure onto Qin Wenyan, forcing him to make a decision. These grandmasters wanted to kill him. What did he want, the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, or his life? Qin Wenyan stared at the people before him. Each and every one of them was a person of virtue and prestige, deciding his life and death as they chatted. It was as though his life wasn't even worth mentioning. And that Gauze, he actually dared to throw stones at Qin Wenyan when he was down. Qin Wenyan swept his gaze over the crowd as he slowly spoke. After speaking so much nonsense, have you finally revealed your true intentions? What a bunch of sanctimonious fellows. I, Qin, don't have the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, and even if I did, it wouldn't be your turn. Chapter 282. As the sound of Qin Wenyan's voice faded, Bai Lu Tong faintly glanced at him. Qin Wenyan, it's a good thing that you're hot-blooded and don't fear death. However, there are many times when there are better choices to be made. Why must you choose the path of death for the sake of venting your anger? No matter what, you are a guest of the White Deer Institute. If you are willing to hand over the ancient scroll to the Institute, I'm sure the other grandmasters won't continue to make things difficult for you. Bai Lu Tong's countenance was calm, as though he was thinking for Qin Wenyan's sake. However, he chose to speak only now. One could very well imagine his intentions. The countenances of those grandmasters all changed as they silently cursed at this old fox. Senior, you worry too much. Junior is still young, how would I want to die? Qin Wenyan calmly replied. Handing over the ancient scroll to Bai Lu Tong? Taking it for himself would be more appropriate. Oh! Bai Lu Tong's countenance flickered before he smiled. Since this is the case, I won't try to persuade you any further. After speaking, he closed his eyes, as though he was prepared to accept the actions of these grandmasters. The high-nosed old Liang, eccentric Song, the black-faced middle-aged man and the rest exchanged glances, as hints of laughter could be seen flickering in their eyes. The high-nosed old Liang stared at Qin Wenyan, his sunken eyes narrowed as he sinisterly stated, "The ancient scroll of the Ascendant naturally belongs to the strongest. Since a junior like you wants to take it for yourself, only death awaits you." As the sound of his voice faded, 3 protectors stepped out, moving towards Qin Wenyan. I've said it before, take one more step and you will die. Qin Wenyan stared at the 3 protectors, his eyes flashing with a golden light. Instantly, the 3 protectors felt their heads shuddering, as though they were struck by a powerful attack. Instantly, the will of their mandates gushed forth, as a pressure as heavy as a mountain gushed forth. One of the protectors grabbed out with his palm, and instantly, a gigantic blood-colored palm the size of a mountain appeared in the air, causing Qin Wenyan's blood to flow unimpeded. Boom! That blood-colored gigantic palm slammed down, causing an explosive sound to ring out. Just when everyone thought that Qin Wenyan had died, they only saw Qin Wenyan still standing there with a smile on his face, calmly looking at them. Those divine inscriptionists all frowned. They could feel that Qin Wenyan's body was gradually turning blurry, as though he wasn't a corporeal entity. Although he was right in front of them, he didn't seem to have a body of flesh and blood. Fenrir rubbed his chin as a faint smile appeared on his face. Divine inscriptionists all had their own specialties. Some were proficient in divine inscriptions, some were proficient in formations, some were proficient in weaponsmithing, and some were proficient in the art of puppetry. Although both of them were 4th-ranked grandmasters, the disparity in their attainments in all aspects could be immense. Fenrir was extremely proficient in divine inscriptions, as well as divine inscriptions formations. Not only that, as a heavenly dipper sovereign, his perception was exceedingly sharp. He had long since discovered that there was a grand formation inscribed by Qin Wenyin here. This formation was an illusory formation, where the illusory and real coexisted. This illusory formation was a fourth-ranked formation. Not only that, what made Fenrir even more astonished was that this fourth-ranked illusory formation had no offensive capabilities. Hence, the illusory energy contained within it was extremely powerful, making it extremely difficult to see through. Hence, the other fourth-ranked grandmasters didn't even notice the existence of this fourth-ranked illusory formation. They also didn't realize that the true purpose of this fourth-ranked illusory formation was to conceal the divine inscriptions within. Those divine inscriptions could be activated at the slightest touch. Fenrir couldn't help but break out in cold sweat for these so-called fourth-ranked grandmasters. How much determination did Qin Wenyan have today? Illusory formation? Those grandmasters weren't mediocre characters. At this moment, they could also tell that there was an extremely well-hidden illusory formation in this place. Old Song. The sharp-nosed old Liang stared at the esteemed Old Song with a questioning expression on his face. Old Song was someone who had dabbled in the art of formations. Old Song was frowning as he narrowed his eyes. An ominous feeling welled up in his heart. He had dabbled in the Tao of formations, and now that there was an illusory formation hidden in front of him, he actually couldn't see through it. This was sufficient to cause him to be on high alert. Staring at the smiling young man in front of him, Old Song continued, "Don't worry, this formation is illusory, we can't attack it. Kill him." The sharp-nosed old Liang spat out another command upon hearing Old Song's words. The three experts dashed forwards, aiming for Qin Wenyan's silhouette. Regardless of whether his opponent was real or illusory, they would still destroy him. However, at this moment, a terrifying whistling sound abruptly rang out. The eyes of the three experts narrowed as they stared at the ground beneath their feet. Over there, a resplendent light suddenly flashed. That was the glow of divine inscriptions. Shio shio shio. The terrifying whistling sound of swords instantly transformed into an ear-piercing sound. The three experts only saw tens of thousands of sword chi converging together to form a spiraling tempest that swept towards them. The might of the tempest formed by tens of thousands of sword chi was extremely terrifying. It was akin to a meat grinder, capable of annihilating everything in its path. They instantly soared into the air, wanting to evade it. Boom! All of a sudden, a sound reverberated through the air. Another resplendent divine inscription lit up beneath their feet. They only felt that there was a force of millions of kilograms pulling at their feet. Their entire bodies were incomparably heavy, and they were actually unable to rise into the air. In an extremely short instant, the spiraling tempest formed by the sword chi revolved around the three of them, enveloping them within. Expressions of terror could be seen on the faces of the three experts as they howled in rage. Their bodies trembled violently, as despair could be seen in their eyes. The spiraling tempest that enveloped them was definitely an attack at the pinnacle of Yuanfu, and right now, it was engulfing them. "Save me!" One of them screamed in a frenzy, as he turned his head and stared at the sharp-nosed old Liang. The look of despair in his eyes caused the hearts of those who saw it to tremble. "Stop!" The sharp-nosed old Liang roared in rage. However, the spiraling tempest formed by the sword chi had completely engulfed the three experts. The whistling sound of the sword chi continued, and occasionally, a drop of crimson blood would splatter out. When the tempest finally calmed down, there was nothing left in that direction. The three experts at the pinnacle of Yuanfu vanished like smoke, vanishing from the vision of the spectators. The countenances of the spectators were all extremely unsightly. There were so many grandmasters here, yet three of them had been killed by Qin Wenyin using the Tao of divine inscriptions. Their gazes turned to Qin Wenyin, who was still standing there. Only now did they realize that this young man wasn't as weak as they had imagined. Fourth-ranked grandmaster? Qin Wenyin stared at the sharp-nosed old Liang, as a mocking light flashed in his eyes. "Do you dare to break my divine inscriptions?" Old Liang's countenance was extremely unsightly to behold. He turned his head and glanced at eccentric Song, only to see eccentric Song narrowing her eyes in contemplation. Earlier, the divine inscriptions were concealed by his illusory formation, and it's true that the formation didn't have any offensive capabilities. Those 3 experts died to the hidden divine inscriptions. I'm sure you've already seen it, and it wasn't just a single peak-tier, 3rd-ranked divine inscriptions. Qin Wendian had long since prepared for this. Their deaths were all worth it. Eccentric Song calmly stated, while old Liang's countenance turned ashen. Was this considered using his protectors to probe Qin Wendian's strength? This old fart was truly scheming and farsighted. Is that so? Since you've already found out, does Grandmaster want to test it out? Qin Wendian indifferently stated to eccentric Song. Eccentric Song stroked his beard as he laughed. "Just a mere 3rd-ranked divine inscription, there's no need for me to act personally. Gauze, you go and break it." Qin Wendian laughed, letting Gauze break it? Old fox. Gauze cursed in his heart when he heard eccentric Song's words. Although he was extremely unhappy with Qin Wendian, he couldn't help but feel fear in his heart when he saw the scene earlier. He knew that it would be extremely dangerous for him to break the divine inscription. The other Grandmasters didn't reply, they merely watched on calmly. At this moment, their hearts were filled with bewilderment. That illusory formation could even fool their eyes. Was it really a 3rd-ranked formation? However, they would rather believe that there were some unique formations that could hide it perfectly, preventing them from seeing through it. If not, if it was a 4th-ranked formation, then, however, they felt that they were worrying too much. How could it be so easy to break through from the 3rd-ranked to the 4th-ranked? How old was Qin Wendian? It was impossible. Without at least 10 years of accumulation, it would be impossible. The inheritance of the Ascendant is truly powerful. Bailu Yu faintly commented. Momentarily, the eyes of the crowd brightened. That's right, Qin Wendian must have comprehended a powerful formation from the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, causing them to be unable to see through it. Gauze, speed up. The black-faced middle-aged man turned his gaze onto Gauze as he coldly stated, "If you kill this brat, we will not mistreat you." Gauze's countenance was extremely unsightly to behold, but he still nodded his head. Numerous puppets appeared before him, and he followed behind them as they advanced towards Qin Wendian. "Kill!" Gauze spat out a single word. Momentarily, the puppets frenziedly dashed out, while he himself stood there motionlessly. Although the killing intent radiating from him was extremely sharp, he was still extremely cautious. Abruptly, the ground beneath the illusory formation lit up with a resplendent radiance as a terrifying aura radiated forth. A terrifying great rock appeared in the air, lunging towards the puppets. Gauze stared at the divine inscription in front of him, as his perception gushed out, his eyes gleaming with sharpness. This divine inscription is extremely easy to break. Gauze, why are you still not moving forward? The black-faced middle-aged man coldly stated. Gauze nodded his head. It wasn't difficult to break the divine inscription in front of him. His steps were extremely slow, as he maintained his vigilance. However, when he took the 3rd step, before he could even get close to the divine inscription, another divine inscription lit up beneath his feet. It was unknown how many divine inscriptions were hidden within this formation. Bzz. A whistling sound rang out from below. Gauze's countenance instantly paled. He was walking on the divine inscription, yet he didn't even notice the divine inscription beneath his feet. Poochie! A terrifying long spear pierced through Gauze's body, nailing him to the ground. Gauze's eyes were still wide open as he stared at Qin Wendian. Regret could be seen flickering in his eyes. Why did he have to come here today? Why did he have to be so talkative? Only to see Qin Wendian waving his hands, as a surge of flames gushed forth, engulfing Gauze's body, incinerating his corpse. At the same time, Qin Wendian kept the ownerless puppets. Now, these puppets belonged to him. The various divine inscriptionists stood there, their countenances ashen. The formation of this Empyrean was simply too powerful, to be able to conceal the third-ranked divine inscriptions so perfectly. Even Gauze, a peak-tier third-ranked divine inscriptionist, was killed by stepping on it. Fourth-ranked divine inscriptionists? Qin Wendian stared at those who didn't dare to take the risk. He coldly laughed. All of you are already so old, yet you still have some attainments in the Tao of divine inscriptions. What a bunch of trash, how pitiful! Chapter 283. Qin Wendian wasn't polite at all, insulting all the Grandmaster-level characters in front of him as though he wanted to incite their anger. Who are these people? Usually, no matter where they went, they would always be treated as esteemed guests. Today, they were being pointed at by a young man. How could they not be embarrassed? However, they didn't reply, nor did any of them act out in anger. Earlier, they forced Gauze to step forward because they wanted him to probe Qin Wendian's strength. They didn't feel the slightest bit of pity for Gauze's death. At the very least, they knew that this illusory formation was extremely mysterious. Beneath it, there were many fatal divine inscriptions. Although they were only third-ranked divine inscriptions, as long as they were hidden there, they wouldn't be able to sense them. No matter how high their attainments in the Tao of divine inscriptions were, stepping into the formation would be extremely dangerous. Which of these people weren't old fellows who had lived for more than half a century? Facing such a situation, they would naturally be extremely cautious. It didn't matter if others died, but their own lives were extremely precious. Even if Qin Wendian wanted to infuriate them, it wouldn't work. Young man, what a heavy baleful aura. Eccentric Song stroked his beard as he coldly continued. However, even if you have the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, do you think you have the qualifications to be so arrogant in front of us? Earlier, we already gave you a chance, but who would have thought that you would be so obstinate? A fourth-ranked Grandmaster would personally inscribe divine inscriptions to kill you. How can you withstand that? As Eccentric Song spoke, he glanced at the others, causing smiles to appear on their faces. Old Ginger was spicier than young Ginger. Why would they bother to break Qin Wendian's formation? They could directly inscribe divine inscriptions to kill Qin Wendian. It would be as easy as flipping their palms. How thick-skinned. Bai Lu couldn't help but laugh when she saw that a group of fourth-ranked Grandmasters didn't even dare to break the formation. What made her even more speechless was that they didn't dare to break the formation, and instead wanted to inscribe divine inscriptions to kill Qin Wendian. Such an action was simply a humiliation, yet these old fellows didn't seem to have the slightest bit of self-awareness. With regards to Bai Lu Yi's voice, these people chose to ignore it. Old Liang, this brat killed your protector. Inscribe a divine inscription to kill him. Old Liang, you should be the one to do it. The black-faced middle-aged man turned his gaze onto Old Liang, causing Old Liang to frown. After which, the black-faced middle-aged man continued, I'll get the puppets to protect you. This dark-faced middle-aged man had refined quite a few peak third-tier puppets. He wanted to refine fourth-tier puppets, and the Empyrean's ancient scroll was his chance. I will carve an array to protect you. Elder Song nodded at Elder Liang. Elder Liang pondered for a moment before nodding. At this moment, Qin Wendian also understood. There were many people here today, but other than Fenrir, there were only 3 fourth-ranked Grandmasters in front of him. Not only that, there was also a Heavenly Dipper sovereign who hadn't spoken since the start. Who knew if he was a fourth-ranked Grandmaster or not? He and Wind Valley were the most powerful people here. Elder Song and the others were probably quite afraid of him and had not allowed him to do anything. As for the others, they should be their disciples or protectors. Qin Wendian wondered if there were any fourth-ranked Grandmasters among them. Old Liang warily took a step forward, his sunken eyes staring at Qin Wendian. He no longer dared to treat Qin Wendian as an ordinary third-ranked Grandmaster. Seeing the actions of these people, Qin Wendian laughed. I, Qin, shall wait for you all to break the array. After speaking, he sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes, as though everything that happened in the outside world had nothing to do with him. This brat is extremely crafty, Old Liang, don't fall for his tricks. The black-faced middle-aged man summoned his puppet to protect Old Liang. Old Liang took a few steps forward, releasing his perception to the maximum. With a stomp of his foot, numerous runic inscriptions manifested on the ground. This fourth-ranked grandmaster was starting to inscribe divine inscriptions. Although old Liang was inscribing the divine inscriptions, he didn't dare to move forward. Instead, he maintained a certain distance from Qin Wenyin. Not long after, the divine inscriptions old Liang was inscribing exuded a powerful might. As an experienced fourth-ranked grandmaster, he only needed 2 hours to inscribe a complete fourth-ranked attack-type divine inscription. The moment the divine inscription was completed, it would be the time of Qin Wentian's death. An hour passed, yet Qin Wentian's eyes were still closed in meditation. Old Liang inclined his head and glanced at him as a sinister light flickered in his eyes. This brat was just sitting there, waiting for his death. After that, he lowered his head and continued inscribing the divine inscription. The might contained within the divine inscription grew stronger and stronger. "How slow?" Qin Wendian murmured, after which, he slammed his palms onto the ground, and instantly, his entire body transformed into a blur as he dashed forward. With a thunderous boom, 2 Jiao dragons appeared in front of him, howling with rage. Old Liang's countenance stiffened, only to see the black-faced middle-aged man coldly snorting as his puppet rushed forward, preparing to block the Jiao dragons. Boom! Qin Wenyin took another step forward, as numerous terrifying arrows pierced through the air, directly locking onto Old Liang. Old Liang stepped out as a shield of divine inscriptions appeared in front of him. After which, he saw that Qin Wenyin was actually standing in the maw of a demonic dragon. The demonic dragon roared forward, while the Jiao dragons on the left and right acted as his protectors, forcing the black-faced middle-aged man's puppet into retreat. The terrifying claws of the demonic dragon lashed out, forcing Old Liang to retreat. With a loud cracking sound, the shield of light shattered, and Qin Wenyin slammed his palms onto the ground. Impudent! The black-faced middle-aged man roared, as a long spear of darkness appeared in his hands. His silhouette flickered as he dashed forward, the spear abruptly pierced out. Instantly, the black dragon within the spear howled in rage, exuding a terrifying might. It was as though he had been waiting for this attack. Blasting out a peak-tier third-ranked attack, this spear of darkness should be close to a fourth-ranked divine weapon. Qin Wenyin abruptly turned and walked back, while the demonic dragon continued forward, colliding head-on with the black-faced middle-aged man's attack, causing a terrifying sound of destruction to echo out. The light of the demonic dragon was destroyed, yet Qin Wenyin had already returned to his original location. Old Liang's countenance was incomparably ashen. The divine inscriptions he painstakingly inscribed were completely destroyed by Qin Wentian's earlier attack. It was as though Qin Wenyan had long since thought of how to destroy his incomplete divine inscriptions. With a single strike, all his hard work had gone up in smoke. Everyone, there's no need to hide anymore. Let's use our own methods to kill this brat. The black-faced middle-aged man wielded the long spear in his hands as he coldly spoke. After which, he slashed out with his spear once more, causing the terrifying black dragon to howl madly as it gushed forth. However, in front of Qin Wenyin, numerous ancient shields of divine inscriptions appeared. Thunderous rumbling sounds rang out, but the attacks of the black-faced middle-aged man had no way to break through the defense of the divine inscriptions he had inscribed. Qin Wenyin used a total of 3 days to inscribe the divine inscriptions as well as the formations here. Ever since Bai Lu Tong obstructed his path back then, he already knew that there would be a commotion. And now, with so many divine inscriptionists here, the preparations he made during these few days could finally be put to good use. Old Liang's sunken eyes narrowed when he heard the words of the black-faced middle-aged man. He had long known that these fellows all had their own methods. But now, they finally couldn't endure it any longer. Eccentric Song stroked his beard as his aged eyes gleamed with sharpness. Only the heavenly Dipper sovereigns remained silent, calmly spectating everything. It was as though the matters here had nothing to do with him. What do you plan to do? Eccentric Song stared at the old man with trepidation in his eyes. This old man was the same as Fenrir. Not only was he a fourth-ranked grandmaster, he was also a heavenly Dipper sovereign. Let's do it based on our own capabilities. That old man casually replied, yet his tone was filled with incomparable arrogance. Fine, since you put it this way, let's do it based on our own capabilities. As the sound of Eccentric Song's voice faded, 3 puppets appeared in front of him. One of the puppets was fully equipped. Its body was as though it was forged from a divine weapon. Both its limbs were covered in terrifying blades. This scene caused the pupils of old Liang's eyes to narrow. This old man definitely had many treasures on him. As a highly respected 4th-ranked grandmaster, he had accumulated quite a bit of wealth over the years. Just that 4th-ranked puppet alone was already extremely valuable. The black-faced middle-aged man smiled. His palms streaked across the air, and the black spear in his hand seemed to have lost a layer of light. Strands of black mist surged, and a terrifying eerie aura filled the air. That sharp aura was extremely terrifying. This was a rank 4 divine weapon. Previously, he had concealed the grade of the divine weapon. In their eyes, Qin Wenyin was just a jumping clown who would die sooner or later. But what they were more concerned about was how Qin Wenyin would obtain the Ascendant's ancient scroll after his death. Hence, all of them held back and didn't really want to risk their lives. But what made them surprised was that ordinary methods wouldn't be able to kill Qin Wenyin. Instead, they would be in danger. Since this was the case, they might as well use the most direct and tyrannical method to settle this. Old Liang cursed in a low voice. It seemed like his wealth was truly too low. Is this the confidence of a 4th-ranked grandmaster? Qin Wentian's eyes gleamed with a terrifying sharpness. Finally, his plan was revealed. Bai Lu Yi's heart skipped a beat, only to see Bai Lu Yu, who was beside her, indifferently interjected, "Little E, do you really think he has a chance? These people are all 4th-ranked grandmasters. Don't underestimate them." Bai Lu Yi stared at the young man. Seeing that Qin Wenyin was still as calm as ever, her voice was filled with stubbornness. Old Liang waved his hands as an umbrella appeared in his hands. With a flick of his palms, the umbrella opened up as a terrifying golden light flowed around it. He walked towards Qin Wenyin, his eyes cold to the extreme. The long spear of darkness in the hands of the black-faced middle-aged man swept across the ground. Instantly, a terrifying black fissure appeared in front of him, and everywhere it passed, the earth would shatter. His gaze was incomparably cold. What kind of 3rd-ranked divine inscription could withstand such power? Even if it was concealed, it would still be destroyed. Old Liang's umbrella radiated a terrifying golden light as it spun forward, shattering the earth into dust. As for Eccentric Song, he followed behind the puppet. The powerful puppet's legs slashed apart the earth, opening up a path for them. They advanced step by step until they were not far away from Qin Wenyin. When they looked at Qin Wenyin again, it was as though they were looking at a dead man. "How do you want to die, young man?" Eccentric Song coldly spoke, only to see Qin Wenyin standing up. A cold smile could be seen in his eyes as he replied, "Are you guys so confident? No matter how well you inscribe the divine inscriptions, or how powerful your attacks are, they will all be useless." "Just like the one behind me," the black-faced middle-aged man coldly stated. "Oh, then why don't you turn around and take a look?" Qin Wenyin coldly spoke. The black-faced middle-aged man coldly laughed as he casually turned his head back. However, in an instant his gaze froze on a certain spot. The flowing silver lines of light radiated with a dazzling light. The ground that was sliced apart didn't seem to affect the flow of the divine inscriptions at all. That divine inscription was unceasingly lacerated, even if the ground was split apart. What was even more terrifying was that in that location, the terrifying silvery light of destruction only lasted for an extremely short instant. Under his gaze, the silvery light converged into a terrifying spiraling silver tempest that was akin to a hurricane, instantly blotting out the skies. Boom! A thunderous sound rang out as the earth trembled. The silvery tempest instantly engulfed everything. Qin Wentian's body was abruptly blasted into the void, transforming into a world of silver. The black-robed middle-aged man, Eccentric Song and Old Liang all stood there in a daze. Their bodies trembled as they inclined their heads, staring at the young man in the air. They only saw Qin Wenyin lowering his head, staring down at them with an ice-cold countenance. "What about now?" Qin Wendian faintly spoke. His voice was calm and filled with confidence, yet it caused their hearts to pound wildly. This was a 4th-ranked divine inscription. Chapter 284. 4th-ranked, that storm of sword chi was filled with an incomparably terrifying aura of destruction. This was clearly the aura of a 4th-ranked divine inscriptionist. Not only that, it was an extremely tyrannical storm of 4th-ranked divine inscriptions. Qin Wenyan wasn't a 3rd-ranked divine inscriptionist, he was a 4th-ranked divine inscriptionist. A 4th-ranked divine inscriptionist who wasn't even 20 years of age? The hearts of the spectators pounded wildly as they trembled violently. No wonder this brat was so arrogant. No wonder Qin Wenyan dared to humiliate them as a bunch of useless juniors. All of them were at least 50 years old, yet they were only at the initial level of 4th-ranked divine inscriptionists. Compared to Qin Wenyan, there was no way they could be compared. One could even say that there was no way to compare them. A 20-year-old 4th-ranked divine inscriptionist compared to a 50-year-old 4th-ranked divine inscriptionist? How could they even compare? Even if Qin Wenyan had started studying divine inscriptions at the age of 10, it wouldn't have been more than 10 years since he started studying divine inscriptions. As for them, they had at least 40 years of experience. The disparity was too great. However, at the same time as their hearts trembled, this made them even more frenzied. It had to be the ancient scroll of the Ascendant. Even though they had seen Qin Wenyan's attainments in the Tao of divine inscriptions, they still believed that Qin Wenyan must have obtained the ancient scroll. Only by relying on the terrifying inheritance of a 5th-ranked divine inscriptionist did he manage to break through to the 4th-ranked. This caused the passion in their hearts to grow even more intense. They had to obtain the ancient scroll of the Ascendant no matter what. This madness caused them to forget the danger they were in. For the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, even if they had to risk their lives, it was worth it. They had to kill this brat and seize the ancient scroll from him. At the side, the large-eyed elder also felt his heart pounding. He glanced at Bai Lui beside him. "You knew long ago, right? You came here just to let me witness this scene, didn't you?" "Grandpa, how is it? Qin Wenyan isn't even 19 yet." Bai Lui smiled at the large-eyed elder. "Not even 19 yet." The large-eyed elder drew in a deep breath. Leaving aside Qin Wenyan's talent in the Tao of divine inscriptions, just based on his monstrous talent in the Tao of divine inscriptions, Qin Wenyan would definitely become a terrifying character in the future. He definitely had the chance to break through to the 5th-ranked Grandmaster realm. Divine inscriptionists were the same as cultivators. The higher one's cultivation base, the higher their status. How could a celestial phenomenon ascendant compare to a heavenly dipper sovereign? And a 5th-ranked Grandmaster would definitely be able to summon the wind and summon the rain in Grand Xia. It wouldn't be a problem for him to recruit as many heavenly dipper sovereigns as he wished. Not only did Qin Wenyan have an extremely high level of attainment in the Tao of Tao, he was also someone with extremely terrifying potential. However, Bai Lu Tong's thoughts were different. He naturally knew of Qin Wenyan's talent and potential, but what he cared more about was the ancient scroll of the Ascendant. "Everyone, let's stop here." The large-eyed elder spoke. At this moment, he already didn't wish for this situation to continue. Qin Wenyan and the other Grandmasters were truly enraged. If they fought to the death, there would undoubtedly be casualties. Regardless of whether it was the Grandmasters or Qin Wenyan, the large-eyed elder didn't want to see that happen. Qin Wenyan stood in the air, the entire space around him transformed into a tempest of swords. This divine inscription was indeed a 4th-ranked divine inscription from the ancient scroll of divine inscriptions. It was named the Sword Cyclone Tempest, and could be divided into many smaller versions. It was considered a type of divine inscription with an extremely high attack power. In order to inscribe this divine inscription, he had spent a great deal of time and effort before he succeeded. At this moment, he was the ruler of this tempest. Below, in the midst of the tempest, the 3 4th-ranked Grandmasters had expressions of extreme caution on their faces as they stared at Qin Wenyan. "Elder, How can it be possible for us to stop now? The black-faced middle-aged man coldly spoke. After which, he and old Liang walked over to Eccentric Song's side. Eccentric Song, although this brat has inscribed a 4th-ranked divine inscription, your puppet is also a 4th-ranked one. We will protect you while you use your puppet to kill this brat. Once he dies, the divine inscription will have no owner, and the attack will dissipate. How about the 3 of us cultivate the ancient scroll of the Ascendant together? Eccentric Song lightly nodded her head. The 2 peak-tier 3rd-ranked puppets were already on her left and right, while the 4th-ranked puppet stood in front. The body of the puppet that was forged from a divine weapon exuded an aura of coldness. Elder, you've also heard it. I, Qin, have been in a passive position from the start to the end. This brat wants my life. Qin Wenin spoke to the large-eyed elder, his words causing the large-eyed elder's expression to stiffen. He knew that if these 4th-ranked grandmasters didn't kill Qin Wenin, they wouldn't give up. Leaving aside the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, if Qin Wenin was still alive, he would be a huge threat to them as well. After today, there would be many transcendent powers coming to the White Deer Institute to recruit Qin Wenin. For a 19-year-old grandmaster, even if it was a transcendent power, they would be willing to support him unconditionally, allowing him to research divine inscriptions. So no matter from which angle one looked at it from, Qin Wenin had to die. Grand Elder, you won't be able to persuade him otherwise, Bai Lu Tong faintly stated. He naturally hoped that the battle would continue. Eccentric Song, order the puppet to kill this brat. Old Liang, use your divine weapon to protect him. The black-faced middle-aged man's voice rang out. He already knew that the umbrella-shaped divine weapon of the high-nosed old Liang could be used for both offense and defense. Good, this brat is too arrogant. Destroy him. Eccentric Song stroked his white beard as he spoke with confidence. After which, his 4th-ranked puppet soared up into the skies, the sabers on its body lacerating the space around it. Even the sword chi was directly sliced apart. Below, the black-faced middle-aged man stabbed his spear into the ground. Instantly, the ground crumbled apart, transforming into a vacuum. At the same time, old Liang's umbrella opened up, floating above the heads of the 3 of them as a screen of light enveloped them within. With their bodies enveloped by 4th-ranked divine inscriptions, they didn't dare to rush out recklessly. Hence, they used their divine weapons to protect themselves, while relying on the 4th-ranked puppet to kill the Lord of Divine Inscriptions, Qin Wenin. Die! Qin Wenin flicked his finger in the air, and instantly, a terrifying sword tempest gushed towards the umbrella-shaped divine weapon. In an instant, the golden light from the tempest sword flashed, and at the same time, the 4th-ranked puppet soared up into the skies. With a terrifying sharpness, it slashed out with its palms as a terrifying beam of cold light shot towards Qin Wenin. Qin Wenin snorted as he continued, "This 4th-ranked puppet, I'll gladly accept it." As the sound of his voice faded, a terrifying sword gushed forth, colliding with the 4th-ranked puppet in a frenzy. At the same time, Qin Wenin waved his palms as a gigantic golden-armored puppet appeared in front of him. Qin Wenin coldly stated. Momentarily, the golden-armored puppet dashed towards the bladed puppet, while Qin Wentian's silhouette floated in the air, once again staring at the 3 divine inscriptionists hiding within their divine weapons. Puppet, he also has a 4th-ranked puppet on him. The countenances of Eccentric Song and the other 2 turned ashen. The golden-armored puppet and the blade-wielding puppet were locked in combat, and there was also the terrifying sword from the side. They had no way to affect Qin Wentian in the slightest. With a wave of his hands, tens of thousands of sword lights whistled through the air, coalescing into a terrifying gigantic sword that exuded boundless sharpness. After which, Qin Wentian pointed his finger downwards, and instantly, the gigantic sword slashed down from the heavens. With a thunderous boom, the gigantic sword slammed into the protective screen of light, causing the bodies of Eccentric Song and the other 2 to tremble violently. What should we do? What should we do? Eccentric Song was in a state of panic. This young man, who wasn't even 19 years of age, had completely exceeded their expectations. Damn it. Old Liang's countenance turned ashen as he stared at the black-faced middle-aged man. This divine weapon of mine has both offense and defense, but in terms of offense and defense, it can't be compared to a pure fourth-ranked divine weapon. The fourth-ranked divine inscription of the opponent is a sword-type divine inscription. It's only a matter of time before it breaks through the defense of the divine weapon. Since you have an attack-type divine weapon, kill your way out. Kill my way out? The expression of the black-faced middle-aged man stiffened. Although he had an attack-type fourth-ranked divine weapon, his cultivation base wasn't at the Heavenly Dipper realm. He was only at the Yuanfu realm. So what if he had a fourth-ranked divine weapon? Initially, they thought that even if Qin Wenyan had set up a fourth-ranked divine inscription, with their fourth-ranked puppets, as well as their attack-type and defensive-type divine weapons, victory was still within their grasp. However, Qin Wenyan had also taken out a fourth-ranked puppet, instantly overturning the situation. Boom. Yet another terrifying shockwave rang out as the gigantic sword slashed downwards in a frenzy. Cracks had already appeared on the umbrella-shaped protective screen of light. If this continues on, it will break sooner or later. Old Liang's countenance turned pale. With them in the center, a storm of swords swept over. As long as the protective screen of light shattered, they would all die without a burial ground. Penghai, help out. Eccentric Song turned his gaze towards the Heavenly Dipper sovereign inscriptionist who had yet to act. Peng Hai was someone they were extremely fearful of. Even after killing Qin Wenyan and obtaining the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, he, the black-faced middle-aged man, and old Liang were still prepared to join forces to deal with Peng Hai. But now, they had no choice but to seek help from Peng Hai. However, Peng Hai was still as calm as ever. A long spear appeared in his hands, imbued with a fearsome fiery rune. However, he didn't move, he merely stood there quietly. His eyes were so swollen that it was as though flames were burning within them as he stared at the divine inscription in front of him. Now that the fourth-ranked Sword Tempest divine inscription had completely erupted, this was the best time to see the divine inscription clearly. A crisp sound rang out as the protective screen of the fourth-ranked divine weapon shattered. Cracks also appeared on the umbrella-shaped protective screen. In that instant, Eccentric Song, Old Liang, and the black-faced middle-aged man lifted their heads in shock, staring at the young man in the air. Terror could be seen on their faces. Qin Wenyan's eyes flashed, and in an instant, the few of them could feel the intense killing intent radiating from Qin Wenyan. Get back here! Eccentric Song commanded the puppet to return, but how could Qin Wenyan not know what he was thinking? The golden-armored puppet and the Tempest divine inscription flew over, entangling Qin Wenyan's puppet. Beady! The silhouette of the black-faced middle-aged man flickered as he dashed out. The long spear of darkness in his hands opened up a path, while the black dragon roared as it dashed out, opening up a path for Qin Wenyan. However, as the sound of swords whistled through the air, a gigantic sword was embedded into the ground in front of him. The black-faced middle-aged man inclined his head, only to see countless beams of sword light pointing towards him. As long as Qin Wenyan waved his hands, he would die without a burial. Little brother Qin, please hold back for now. At this moment, the large-eyed elder's tone of address towards Qin Wenyan was much more polite. A 19-year-old fourth-ranked grandmaster, he naturally had to treat Qin Wenyan with respect. The three of them all have some status. This man is a guest elder from the Han clan of the Moon Continent. The Han clan's influence in the Moon Continent isn't weak at all. The large-eyed elder reminded Qin Wenyan. That's right, if you kill me, the Han clan will definitely not spare you. The black-faced middle-aged man glared at Qin Wenyan. How impressive were you earlier, yet now you're using your background. How pitiful. If the Han clan wants to avenge you, I will immediately join a transcendent power. Do you think the Han clan would dare to touch me? Qin Wenyan's gaze swept over to the black-faced middle-aged man, causing his countenance to turn even darker. A 19-year-old fourth-ranked grandmaster? As long as news of this spread out, how could a mere Han clan be able to contend against the powers that wanted to recruit Qin Wenyan? There are so many treasures here, It's a waste to leave them on the three of you. Why don't you leave them for me? As the sound of Qin Wentian's voice faded, sword chi swept out as a gigantic sword slashed downwards. The black-faced middle-aged man blocked with his spear, colliding head-on with the gigantic sword. Abruptly, a resplendent beam of sword light whizzed past his neck, causing him to feel a chill as a line of blood appeared on his neck. Eccentric Song and Eccentric Liang were both terrified when they saw this scene. Their countenances were as white as a sheet of paper. Qin Wenyin had slain the black-faced middle-aged man. A fourth-ranked grandmaster had fallen. Chapter 285. Not long ago, they told Qin Wenyin that the Ascendant's ancient scroll was in Qin Wentian's possession. It was a waste of a heavenly treasure. If he didn't hand it over, he would be killed. Right now, Qin Wenyin had returned their words to them. The sword chi continued whistling through the air as the black-faced middle-aged man's body was destroyed by that terrifying sword tempest. Qin Wenyin waved his hands and an instant later, a divine interspatial ring as well as a long black spear appeared in his hands. He then kept them away. The wealth of a fourth-ranked grandmaster must have been quite bountiful this time around. A cold light flashed past. Qin Wenyin glanced at Eccentric Song and Eccentric Liang, only to see that their countenances were as pale as paper. Eccentric Song squeezed out a smile as he looked at Qin Wenyin. Brother Qin's talent is truly shocking. Such a young grandmaster, it's sufficient for your name to shake the entire moon continent. This old man was foolish. If I had offended you in any way, please forgive me. I'm willing to gift a fourth-ranked puppet to Brother Qin as an apology. After which, Eccentric Song bowed slightly to Qin Wenyin, showing his sincerity. However, Qin Wenyin was still coldly staring at him. His gaze was as sharp as the edge of a blade, and the terrifying sword intent he exuded caused the terror in Eccentric Song's heart to intensify. This old man and Brother Qin don't have a life and death grudge. Why must we fight to the death? Eccentric Song knew that revealing his background wouldn't be enough to intimidate Qin Wenyin. Hence, he could only use the promise of benefits as he continued. As long as Brother Qin forgoes this matter, I will definitely not mistreat Brother Qin. Just moments ago, Eccentric Song had just threatened to kill Qin Wenyin. Yet now, he was saying that he didn't have a life and death grudge with Qin Wenyin? How laughable. And yet, Eccentric Song didn't seem to feel the slightest bit of shame when he spoke. In front of Qin Wenyin, the sword tempest manifested, transforming into a terrifying gigantic sword. Qin Wenyin stretched out his hand and pointed a finger at Eccentric Song. Instantly, a terrifying sword beam slashed through the air, causing Eccentric Song's countenance to turn deathly pale. Chi! As the sword light swept past, Eccentric Song's body was directly split into two. The body of the high-nosed old man Liang trembled violently as he grabbed the umbrella-shaped divine weapon and hurriedly fled from the divine inscription. Qin Wenyin did not intend to forgive them at all. This guy wanted to kill them. How could he escape? The sword light slashed down, and his body came to a stop. A bloody light appeared between his brows. Qin Wentian's silhouette descended as he started to collect his spoils of war. 3 fourth-ranked grandmasters, the spoils of war this time around were many times more than his entire fortune. However, just as Qin Wenyin was collecting his spoils of war, the earth abruptly trembled. Qin Wentian's eyes turned incomparably sharp. Turning his eyes over, he saw that Peng Hai, who had been observing the divine inscriptions all this while, had finally made his move. Peng Hai's attack was earth-shattering, and wherever his long spear passed by, a piercing sound rang out, causing Qin Wentian's countenance to freeze. A fourth-ranked grandmaster at the Heavenly Dipper realm was indeed far superior to a Yuanfu grandmaster. Wu Xiu's strength was too important. At this moment, Peng Hai acted, ignoring the attacks of the divine inscriptions. Astral nova appeared in his body as an incomparably resplendent long spear appeared, frenziedly sweeping through the divine inscriptions. Terrifying rumbling sounds rang out as the divine inscriptions were shattered, and the sword chi grew weaker and weaker. After waiting for such a long time, he had already thought of a way to neutralize the divine inscriptions. He was just waiting for this moment to strike. Heavenly Dipper sovereigns weren't comparable to Yuanfu grandmasters with fourth-ranked divine weapons. Their astral novas were as fearsome as fourth-ranked divine weapons, capable of breaking through anything. Qin Wentian's silhouette flickered as the golden-armored puppet whizzed over, standing in front of him. At the same time, he kept the other puppet away. Boom! Another explosive sound rang out as the divine inscriptions were destroyed. Peng Hai's palms trembled as the astral nova spear pierced through the air. Instantly, Qin Wenin felt as though his body was about to be pierced through. This was the power of a mandate. How terrifying was the mandate of a Heavenly Dipper sovereign? Go! Qin Wentian's silhouette flickered as he retreated, only to see the golden-armored puppet pouncing over, clashing against the astral nova. The astral nova seemed to have a life of its own, sweeping out in a frenzy, each strike containing an earth-shattering might. The golden-armored puppet grabbed out with its palms, clashing against the astral nova, causing the earth to tremble. Peng Hai's eyes swept over to Qin Wenin, the sharpness of his gaze seemingly capable of penetrating through Qin Wenin. His silhouette flickered with the speed of lightning. A 19-year-old fourth-ranked grandmaster indeed had shocking potential, and there would be countless major powers inviting him to join them. However, once he died, there would be nothing left. Now, Peng Hai wanted to kill Qin Wenin, seizing the ancient scroll of the Ascendant. Qin Wenin, you still have a chance. Bailu Yu indifferently stated, his words causing Qin Wentian's eyes to narrow. Now, Bailu Yu actually wanted to take advantage of him, threatening him to hand over the ancient scroll to his father, Bailu Tong. Great-grandpa. Bailu Yi stared at the large-eyed elder, as a pleading expression appeared on her face. Great Elder, don't you wish for a fifth-ranked grandmaster to appear in our White Deer Institute in the future? I have to obtain the ancient scroll of the Ascendant no matter what, Bailu Tong coldly stated. Bailu Tong, who was at the side, coldly stated. The battle here had attracted the attention of many experts from the White Deer Institute. When they arrived, they immediately asked, "What's going on?" Qin Wenin, a 19-year-old fourth-ranked grandmaster. He's a good friend of mine, yet Elder Bailu Tong wants to kill him and seize the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, Bailu Yi coldly stated. Bailu Yi spoke, causing the eyes of the crowd to freeze. A 19-year-old fourth-ranked grandmaster? What about the other fourth-ranked grandmasters? Someone asked. They were all killed by Qin Wenin using divine inscriptions, Bailu Yu coldly replied. Bailu Yu coldly replied. Because of Qin Wenin, he and Bailu Yi were now on opposite sides. Father. Bailu Yi turned her gaze to her father. Bailu Shan's countenance flashed with a strange light as he stared ahead. Qin Wenin was still using third-ranked divine inscriptions to defend, yet they were all being destroyed by his opponent. Grandmaster Peng Hai, that's enough. Bailu Shan spoke. After which, he stepped out, whistling through the air. Brother Shan, what are you doing? Bailu Yu's silhouette flickered as he appeared in front of Bailu Shan. Bailu Yi's countenance turned pale. She stared at the large-eyed elder, only to hear the latter calmly replying, "Don't be anxious." How could he not be anxious? Peng Hai wanted to end the battle as soon as possible. He used his astral nova to delay the puppet while he brandished his long spear, dashing towards Qin Wenin. With a flick of his hand, the long spear transformed into a beam of cold light that shot towards Qin Wenin. A raging wind gusted by as a shrill screech rang out. After which, a resplendent lotus flower appeared in front of Qin Wenin, swirling around the long spear. In an instant, the long spear was enveloped within. Behind Qin Wenin, a silhouette appeared. This silhouette had a flawless physique, and was clad in white with a veil covering her face. She exuded an otherworldly aura akin to that of a celestial fairy. Her silhouette stood in front of Qin Wenin. A gentle smile flickered in Qin Wentian's eyes as he stared at the silhouette. She always appeared at the most crucial moment, silently protecting him, as though she was omnipresent. I'll get the puppet to help you kill this person. Qin Wentian's eyes flickered with sharpness as he stared at Peng Hai. This person's combat prowess isn't high, I can deal with him. Qin Er's voice was clear and melodious. Although her words were cold, They caused Qin Wenyan to feel extremely comfortable when he heard them. Peng Hai's countenance stiffened as his countenance turned extremely unsightly. Those from the White Deer Institute also had looks of bewilderment on their faces. There was actually a Heavenly Dipper sovereign protecting Qin Wenyan? Not only that, this Heavenly Dipper sovereign was an extremely beautiful woman, akin to a celestial maiden from a painting. Their gazes involuntarily shifted onto Bailu Yi, only to see that even she had a puzzled expression on her face. Qin Wenyan had said that he and Mo Qingqing were lovers. In that case, who was this celestial maiden in front of them? He remembered that she had appeared once before. Peng Hai's countenance was extremely unsightly to behold. He glanced at Qing before shifting his gaze onto the experts from the White Deer Institute. He knew that the matter today was already destined to fail. Farewell. His long spear astral nova whistled in rage as his silhouette flickered as he departed. Qing still stood there quietly and didn't give chase. Qin Wenyan cast a glance at Qing as he smiled. He didn't say anything, nor did he ask any questions. However, Qing's beautiful eyes flickered, as though she could read Qin Wenyan's thoughts. After which, her lips trembled as her voice transformed into strands of silk, drifting into Qin Wenyan's ears. He won't be able to escape. The people from the Celestial Lake Palace are right outside. Today, no one will dare to touch you. Qing's voice directly entered Qin Wenyan's ears, causing Qin Wenyan to freeze. The people from the Celestial Lake Palace had arrived? This caused an expression of bewilderment to appear on Qin Wenyan's face. Why would the people from the Celestial Lake Palace appear at this time? Sweeping his gaze across the crowd from the White Deer Institute, he saw Di Cheng, as well as a young man with an extraordinary demeanor. At this moment, Qin Wenyan finally understood. So it turned out that Fairy Qingmei had always been paying attention to him. As the lover of the Azure Emperor, Fairy Qingmei should know many secrets that others didn't. Everything that happened in the White Deer Institute, including the arrival of Di Feng, as well as the difficulties he was facing, were all known to her. At this moment, Qin Wenyan understood that the relationship between Fairy Qingmei and the Azure Emperor wasn't as rumored. On the contrary, no one cared more about the Azure Emperor than she did. Even if he was the successor of the Azure Emperor, because he had obtained the Azure Emperor token, Fairy Qingmei would support him unconditionally, only acknowledging him as the successor. They came at the right time. A smile appeared in Qin Wenyan's eyes. Earlier, he had displayed his talent as a fourth-ranked grandmaster, in addition to Fairy Qingmei's support. In this case, no matter who stood behind Di Feng, he wouldn't be at a disadvantage. I bid my farewell as well. Grandmaster Fenrir knew that this wasn't the time for him to stay. Clasping his hands to the crowd, he departed the area. As for those who came with the fourth-ranked grandmasters, they had long since fled with their tails between their legs. It was as though they were afraid that if they were a step slower, they would be killed by Qin Wenyan. Not long after, other than those from the White Deer Institute, only Qin Wenyan and Qing remained. Fourth-ranked grandmaster. Bailu Yu suddenly laughed coldly as he stared at the crowd from the White Deer Institute. Everyone, this young man came to our White Deer Institute to study divine inscriptions. In fact, he already has an extremely high level of attainment in the Tao of divine inscriptions. Not only that, he even has a Heavenly Dipper sovereign following him. I'm afraid that he has some ulterior motives. My heart won't die. Qin Wenyan silently mused as he glanced at Bailu Yu. Chapter 286. Qin Wenyan laughed. I came to the White Deer Institute to study divine inscriptions and became friends with Little E. I've never done anything to offend the White Deer Institute, yet you're accusing me of something I don't deserve. How laughable. If you're greedy for my treasures, just say it. There's no need to be so hypocritical. Bailu Yu narrowed his eyes. If he allowed Qin Wenyan to leave the White Deer Institute today, he would never be able to obtain the ancient scroll ever again. Seeing that more and more experts from the White Deer Institute had gathered here, Bailu Tong finally spoke. Everyone, let's discuss how we should handle this matter. Bai Lu Tong, have immersed myself in the Tao of divine inscriptions for many years, and my attainments in it aren't weak. If I can obtain the ancient scroll, I might have a chance to break through to the 5th ranked. The value of a 5th ranked divine inscriptionist, I'm sure all of you can understand. Qin Wenyin isn't even 19 yet he's already a 4th ranked divine inscriptionist. Not only that, he's a good friend of mine. Why must the White Deer Institute do such a despicable thing? Compared to you, Elder Bai Lu Tong, he has a higher chance of breaking through to the 5th ranked, Bai Lu Yi retorted. Impudent, little E, although the elders of the White Deer Institute regard you highly, you have no right to talk back to them like this, Bai Lu Yu berated. Not only that, even if he has a higher chance, he's still an outsider. There are some words that I have no choice but to say. Bai Lu Yi knew that Qin Wenyin was the holder of the Azure Emperor token. She didn't know what would happen if the elders of the White Deer Institute treated him like this. Uncle Yu, bring them away and guard the back mountain. Don't let anyone near, Bai Lu Yi commanded to an old man who was extremely loyal to the White Deer Institute. Uncle Yu understood Bai Lu Yi's meaning, and with a wave of his hands, he brought those who weren't core members away. Do the two of you want to leave? Bai Lu Yi asked Di Feng. Little E, Di Feng is an esteemed guest of our White Deer Institute. There's no need to hide this, Bai Lu Tong replied. I, Di Feng, guarantee that Miss Yi's words will never be leaked. Di Feng smiled. Bai Lu Yi stared at him, before turning her gaze onto those from the White Deer Institute. She coldly laughed. There are some words I have to say today. Elder Tong, you should ask yourself, in terms of attainment in the Tao of divine inscriptions, whose talent is higher? Bai Lu Tong stared at Bai Lu. He didn't reply, only to hear an elder interjecting. Although Elder Tong's attainments are high, his talent might not be higher than little Yi's. In that case, if the White Deer Institute possesses the inheritance of the Ascendant, who do you all think would have the highest chance of becoming a 5th ranked divine inscriptionist? Bai Lu Yi asked again, her words causing expressions of bewilderment to appear on the faces of the crowd. Bai Lu Shan's eyes brightened. From Bai Lu Yi's words, it seemed that she had a chance to obtain the Ascendant's inheritance. That's right, his daughter had a close relationship with Qin Wenyin. Share it, Bai Lu Tong coldly stated. What a joke. Even if Qin Wenyin obtained the Ascendant's inheritance, it belongs to him. You want to share it? Bai Lu Yi coldly laughed. Today, I'll tell all the elders that Qin Wenyin has indeed obtained the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, and in the future he will definitely become a 5th ranked divine inscriptionist. Other than this, Qin Wenyin has already given the ancient scroll to me. The countenances of the crowd froze. Qin Wenyin had given the ancient scroll to Bai Lu? It seemed like the two of them were really lovers. Not only that, Qin Wenyin treated Bai Lu Yi so well. A smile broke out on Bai Lu Shan's face. If this was the case, there was no need to doubt his choice. He would unconditionally stand on Qin Wentian's side. Bai Lu Yi's grandfather, one of the 9 elders of the White Deer Institute, also stroked his beard and laughed. The more he looked at Qin Wenyin, the more he liked him. A 19-year-old 4th-ranked grandmaster? He was naturally more inclined to befriend Qin Wenyin. It was only because the ancient scroll of the Ascendant was too valuable that Bai Lu Tong's heart was filled with greed. This was why he wanted to kill Qin Wenyin and seize the ancient scroll. If not, such a thing wouldn't have happened, and they would still protect Qin Wenyin. Elders, please consider this carefully. If Elder Bai Lu Tong acted against Qin Wenyin, Bai Lu Yu, wouldn't have the face to remain in the White Deer Institute. The White Deer Institute would lose 2 5th-ranked grandmasters, Bai Lu Yi stated. Momentarily, Bai Lu Tong's countenance turned exceptionally unsightly to behold. For the sake of the ancient scroll, even if Bai Lu Yi was a member of the White Deer Institute, he could still disown her. Little E, are you threatening the White Deer Institute? Bai Lu Tong coldly retorted. Not only that, as a junior, since you obtained the ancient scroll, why didn't you hand it over to your elders? Is this something a junior should do? Today, I've finally seen through Elder Tong. Coveting the ancient scroll of others, yet still acting so righteously. Why should I hand it over to you? Bai Lu Yi mocked. After which, she turned her gaze onto the others. Elders, Please decide. Elder Tong, you've gone too far. Bai Lu Yi's grandfather was naturally on his granddaughter's side. There's no need to argue any further, it's simply too embarrassing. The large-eyed elder couldn't help but berate when he saw this scene. After which, he turned to Qin Wenin, "Little brother Qin, as a guest of Little E, the White Deer Institute has offended us today. Please don't take offense." When those grandmasters came to demand the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, not only did our White Deer Institute not stop them, you even took the side of the evildoers. As the great elder, I didn't intervene in time. This is my mistake. The great elder personally admitted his mistake, causing the others to shut their mouths. They instantly understood what was going on today. As a grandmaster, Bai Lu Tong coveted the ancient scroll of the Ascendant in Qin Wentian's hands. But because of Bai Lu Yi, he didn't directly deal with Qin Wentian. Instead, he wanted to use the other grandmasters to pressure Qin Wentian so that Qin Wentian would obediently hand over the ancient scroll of the Ascendant in exchange for the protection of the White Deer Institute. Those fourth-ranked grandmasters could naturally see through Bai Lu Tong's intentions. But the temptation of the ancient scroll of the Ascendant was simply too great. Hence, they couldn't bear to give it up. However, nobody could have imagined the ending. Qin Wentian continued to use his trump cards. Fourth-ranked divine inscriptions, fourth-ranked puppets, and even heavenly dipper sovereigns. With the deaths of those fourth-ranked grandmasters, Bai Lu Tong's plans were all for naught. Hence, he decided to use the White Deer Institute to pressure Qin Wentian, forcing him to hand over the ancient scroll of the Ascendant. However, he had already offended Bai Lu Yi, who was on good terms with Qin Wentian. Hence, the current situation arose. Bai Lu Tong was still unwilling to give up, but the large-eyed elder and the others didn't agree. Qin Wentian could see the sincerity in the large-eyed elder's words, and he knew that this elder had a good impression of him. Hence, he smiled, this matter was done by Bai Lu Tong alone, it has nothing to do with the White Deer Institute. I, Qin, am naturally clear about this. Since the large-eyed elder took the initiative to form a good relationship with him, he naturally wouldn't fall out with the power he wanted to control. Good, it's rare for you to be so magnanimous. The large-eyed elder smiled and nodded. In truth, he hadn't acted before because he wanted to see if Qin Wentian could handle the situation himself. If Bai Lu Tong really wanted to kill Qin Wentian, he would still act to stop him. Grand Elder, this matter isn't something you can decide alone. I will report this to the elders and let them decide. At this moment, the previously silent Bai Lu Tong spoke again, his words causing the countenances of the crowd to sink as they bitterly smiled in their hearts. The situation was getting more and more strained, causing the internal factions of the White Deer Institute to split. Such a situation was something nobody wanted to see. Regardless of the Grand Elder's side or Bai Lu Tong's side, they all represented a portion of the White Deer Institute's power. The reason why Bai Lu Tong had such confidence was because his father was one of the 4 elders, and was in charge of the Institute's divine inscriptionists. His status was extremely important, and he was extremely protective of his own people. The large-eyed elder's countenance turned extremely unsightly when he heard Bai Lu Tong's words. How embarrassing! Because of greed, the internal factions of the White Deer Institute were divided. This was something he had never expected, and didn't want to see. Since you have the ancient scroll, why don't you take it out and share it with us? From afar, a voice drifted over, causing the hearts of many to involuntarily tremble. The Supreme Elder had spoken. The crowd all had their own thoughts. This Supreme Elder definitely wanted to share the ancient scroll with the most powerful grandmasters of the White Deer Institute. For the sake of the Institute's benefits, he wasn't wrong in doing so. Qin Wenin inclined his head and stared at the horizon. It seemed like there was an elder supporting Bai Lu Tong. Now that he had become a 4th-ranked grandmaster, the attitude of the Supreme Elder was still the same. Evidently, it was because he, Qin Wenin, was an outsider. Luckily, he didn't take out the Azure Emperor token back then. If not, he didn't know what the White Deer Institute's attitude would be like. As an outsider, I also feel that Qin Wenin should share the ancient scroll with us. In return, the White Deer Institute can guarantee his safety, Di Feng spoke, causing a smile to appear on Bai Lu Tong's face. Qin Wenyin swept his gaze over to Di Feng as he coldly laughed. How fair. For you. Do I need you to interfere in my affairs? I'm someone you can't afford to offend. Di Cheng, who was standing beside Di Feng, coldly replied. Just a fourth-ranked grandmaster, he can easily crush you to death. How arrogant. Descendant of the Azure Emperor, from the Supreme Di clan? As the sound of Qin Wentian's voice faded, the crowd couldn't help but be shocked. Their incomparably sharp gazes stared at Qin Wenyan. This was the greatest secret of the White Deer Institute, yet Qin Wenyan actually knew about it. The gazes of the crowd involuntarily turned to Bai Lu. Even the elders of Bai Lu were blaming her for not knowing the gravity of the situation. Traitorous bastard. Bai Lu mocked. After which, he took a step forward. In that case, you deserve to die even more. This Qin Wenyan had really given him a good excuse to act. Qin Wenyan was truly courting death. Bai Lu stared at Qin Wenyan in astonishment. The voice of the Azure faction sounded out. Was Qin Wenyan planning to lay all his cards on the table? Damn it all. Di Cheng coldly laughed. Today, Qin Wenyan would die for sure. Everyone should have seen it for yourself. Those from the Supreme Di clan also want him dead. Bai Lu stared at the crowd. Upon hearing his words, Qin Wenyan laughed. Why do you respect the descendants of the Azure Emperor so much? The White Deer Institute is the descendant of the Azure Emperor. Didn't Bai Lu tell you this? Bai Lu coldly laughed. If the successor of the Azure Emperor wants you to die, would you die? Qin Wenyan looked at Bai Lu with a mocking expression. If that's even possible. Bai Lu laughed. Right now, he wanted to use this opportunity to express his support for Di Feng. In that case, Di Feng would stand on his side today. Qin Wenyan smiled as he nodded his head. In that case, you can go and die now. After speaking, Qin Wenyan stared at the horizon as he spoke. Qin Wenyan requests an audience with the supreme elders of the White Deer Institute. His voice rumbled and spread far into the distance. In the void, there were many responses. How arrogant. Do you think the supreme elders are people you can meet just because you say so? Bai Lu coldly laughed. You are still not qualified. Di Cheng's hatred for Qin Wenyan had been ignited ever since he was humiliated. And now, this fellow was finally going to die. Qin Wenyan laughed. After which, he stretched out his palm as he icily stated, How about this? Humph. Expressions of disdain flashed on the faces of the crowd as they turned their gazes onto Qin Wentian's palm. After which, they froze as they stared intently at it. In the next instant, their eyes froze as their hearts pounded violently. The large-eyed elder stared at the gigantic word, his heart pounding. That was the word Azure. Di Feng's eyes gleamed with sharpness as his heart pounded. In Qin Wentian's hands was the Azure Emperor token. Qin Wenyan swept his gaze over to Bai Lu Tong, Di Cheng, and the rest as he enunciated each word slowly. I, Qin Wenyan, am the true successor of the Azure Emperor. As the sound of his voice faded, the hearts of those in the crowd all trembled violently. The Azure Emperor token, that was the Azure Emperor token. Di Feng was only a descendant of the Supreme Di clan. He, Qin Wenyan, was the one who held the Azure Emperor token in his hands. He was the true successor of the Azure Emperor. Chapter 287. The Azure Emperor Token. Qin Wenyan, he actually had the Azure Emperor token in his hands. This indicated that Qin Wenyan was the true successor of the Azure Emperor. Those from the Di clan, as well as the direct descendants of the White Deer Institute, naturally understood the significance of the Azure Emperor token. With the Azure Emperor token, one could command the hidden Azure faction. Everyone should understand my purpose for coming to the White Deer Institute, right? Qin Wenyan coldly laughed as he stared at Bai Lu. Sinister intentions? With the Azure Emperor token in his hands, he could already command the entire White Deer Institute. What sinister intentions? Qin Wenyan turned his gaze onto Di Cheng, only to see the coldness in Di Cheng's eyes. How could this be? How could the Azure Emperor token be in the hands of Qin Wenyan? So easily squashed me to death? A mere descendant of the D clan dares to speak to me in such a manner? Even the old ancestor of your D clan wouldn't dare to say such words in front of me. Insubordination, what punishment do you deserve? Qin Wendian abruptly berated. His gaze swept over, causing Di Cheng to feel an immense pressure bearing down on him, causing his state of mind to waver. Insubordination, what punishment do you deserve? He, Di Cheng, was only a junior of the D clan, while Qin Wendian had the Azure Emperor token in his possession. His actions could be considered as insubordination. Even if the elders of the D clan were to meet the owner of the Azure Emperor token, they would still have to respect him and obey his commands. The large-eyed elder drew in a deep breath. Di Feng's performance in coming to the White Deer Institute had led them to believe that Di Feng would be the successor of the D clan, and that in the future, he would become the leader of the Azure Emperor. However, he had never imagined that the person who took out the Azure Emperor token would be none other than Qin Wendian. Qin Wendian, a 19-year-old fourth-ranked Grandmaster, came to the White Deer Institute because he was the true successor of the Azure Emperor. Before this, Qin Wendian had been enduring silently because he wasn't sure of the attitude of the White Deer Institute. Hence, he didn't take out the Azure Emperor token recklessly. But now, he finally couldn't endure any longer. Because the White Deer Institute and the Supreme D clan actually wanted to kill him, the successor of the Azure Emperor. It seemed like a drama, but it was actually happening. His gaze involuntarily shifted to Bailu. Bailu Yi was the only one who wasn't shocked. Most probably, Qin Wendian had already told her everything. Because of their special relationship, Bailu Yi would never betray Qin Wendian. Qin Wendian had absolute trust in Xiao Yi. After all, this identity was too sensitive. The large-eyed elder glanced at Di Feng and the rest, feeling a headache coming on. Everything that had happened today had completely exceeded his expectations. Right now, it was no longer just a matter of the Ascendant's ancient scroll, it concerned the future of the White Deer Institute. Would the White Deer Institute listen to the commands of the descendant of the Azure Emperor? If they obeyed, should they obey Qin Wendian who had the Azure Emperor token, or should they obey Di Feng, the successor of the D clan? All of these were extremely difficult problems. Di Feng was ranked number 5 in the Heavenly Fate rankings. If it was in the past, it would be extremely difficult for Qin Wendian to compete with him. But now, Qin Wendian was a 19-year-old fourth-ranked Grandmaster. Just based on talent alone, both of them were extremely outstanding. Di Feng's advantage was that he had the support of the D clan. As for Qin Wendian, he was even younger. Nobody knew how far he would go in the future in terms of divine inscriptions and martial Dao. But without a doubt, his potential was extremely terrifying. If not, how could Qin Wendian have obtained the Azure Emperor token? This meant that Qin Wendian had already passed the test left behind by the Azure Emperor. That was why he was chosen to be the successor. Let me verify the authenticity of the Azure Emperor token, Di Cheng stated. He had no way to accept the fact that Qin Wendian had the Azure Emperor token in his hands. Who do you think you are? Do you even have the qualifications to touch the Azure Emperor token? Qin Wendian retorted. DE of my D clan was captured by the 9 Mystical Palace, and the Azure Emperor token has gone missing. But now, it's actually in your hands. This can't help but cause me to suspect if you are someone from the 9 Mystical Palace. Although Di Cheng wasn't as outstanding as Di Feng, he was extremely intelligent and had many schemes up his sleeves. He naturally knew that his D clan wanted to take over the Azure Emperor Palace. If not, he wouldn't have allowed Di Feng to stay in the White Deer Institute for such a long time. Now that Qin Wendian had appeared with the Azure Emperor token in his hands, it was equivalent to spoiling their plans. This was unacceptable. Qin Wendian and a Heavenly Dipper sovereign were far from enough to protect the Azure Emperor Palace. Qin Wendian laughed as he kept the Azure Emperor token. After which, he stated, "Elders of the White Deer Institute, do you still want to watch the show? Isn't it about time for you all to come out?" As the sound of his voice faded, not a single person appeared. This caused Qin Wendian to understand how difficult it was to completely control a power that had been passed down for thousands of years. The other party was obviously doing this to show him. Leaving aside the fact that the situation was still unclear, even if the White Deer Institute had acknowledged his identity, if they didn't listen to him, Qin Wenyan, what could he, Qin Wenyan, do? A power that had been passed down for thousands of years, how could the White Deer Institute give up their authority to a 19-year-old Wu Xiu? Not only that, they had to take the risk. Even if Di Feng had the support of the Di clan behind him, he still hadn't obtained the full approval of the White Deer Institute. They could only say that they respected Di Feng enough. At this moment, even though the elders of the White Deer Institute knew what was happening, they still refused to show themselves. They wanted to see how things would be handled. You better explain your identity first, Bai Lu Tong coldly stated. That's right, the Azure Emperor token. Let us see if it's real or fake. Bai Lu Yu coldly laughed. You guys are too impudent. Bai Lu Yi didn't expect Bai Lu Tong and the others to be so difficult to deal with. Even after Qin Wenyan had taken out the Azure Emperor token, they still ignored him. Not only that, the attitude of the elders also made Bai Lu Yi understand that Qin Wenyan was still a lone wolf. The elders of the White Deer Institute didn't give him enough respect. Even if Qin Wenyan had extraordinary talent, it didn't mean that the White Deer Institute would hand over all authority to Qin Wenyan just because Qin Wenyan had talent. This concerned the future of the White Deer Institute, and although Bai Lu Yi understood, she still felt extremely uncomfortable. At the very least, they should be more respectful towards Qin Wenyan, right? Don't forget, earlier you said that you could die. Now I want you to die. Qin Wenyan glared at Bai Lu Yu, yet Bai Lu Yu only laughed maniacally. Ridiculous, you haven't even proven your identity and you already want me to die? Seems like if I don't take a closer look at the secrets within your interspatial ring, I won't be able to do anything. Qin stepped forwards, standing in front of Qin Wenyan, while Bai Lu Tong also took a step forward. I want to take a look as well. Di Qin coldly laughed. Unknowingly, an old protector had appeared behind him. This old protector was also a heavenly dipper sovereign, and he stepped out together with Di Qin. At the same time, outside of the White Deer Institute, in the skies far away, a few gigantic demonic beasts could be seen hovering in the air. On the back of one of the demonic beasts, a demonic middle-aged man could be seen. The eyes of this middle-aged man shone with a demonic light, shining with a golden light that seemed to penetrate through space. Everything that happened on the grassy plains of the White Deer Institute appeared in front of him. After that, it transformed into a screen of light that was imprinted in the eyes of the demonic beasts and the people here. How impudent! It's been a few thousand years, yet these people have already forgotten the respect they should have for the Azure Emperor. Upon seeing the Azure Emperor token, not a single one of them had the slightest bit of respect. An old woman with a snake staff in her hands stared at the scene in front of her, as a baleful aura emanated from her. At the feet of the old woman, there was a corpse. If Qin Wenyan was here, he would have instantly recognized it. This corpse was none other than the fourth-ranked inscriptionist grandmaster who had escaped earlier. Now, he was already a dead man. Indeed, they are too impudent. Not only did they not respect the Azure Emperor, they even dared to threaten him with words and even wanted to use violence. A skinny old man beside the old woman coldly spoke, his eyes flashing with a demonic light. A seductive laughter rang out as a sexy woman giggled. Not only that, those old fellows are still pretending to be oblivious, they haven't even come out yet. Do they want to see young Master Qin handle this yourself? Since those old fellows don't want to come out, why don't you guys handle it for them? At this moment, a middle-aged woman exuded an aura of coldness. As the sound of her voice faded, those demonic humans all started laughing. A raging wind gusted by as demonic beasts soared through the air. That demonic middle-aged man retracted his demonic eyes, and all of them sped towards that direction. At the same time, on the grassy plains, several silhouettes walked towards Qin Wenyan, exuding a domineering aura. The supreme elders of the White Deer Institute still hadn't appeared. They were probably still waiting to see how things would develop. Although they wouldn't allow anything to happen to Qin Wenyan, if they did so, it would still be extremely disrespectful to Qin Wenyan, the successor of the Azure Emperor. Di Cheng and Bailu Yu walked towards Qin Wenyan, while Qing and the golden-armored puppet appeared in front of Qin Wenyan. Bailu Tong and Di Cheng's guards also took a few steps forwards. Successor of the Azure Emperor? I really want to take a good look. Di Cheng coldly laughed. You guys won't have the chance to see. At this moment, a voice drifted over from the air, causing the crowd to be startled. Inclining their heads, they stared in the direction of the voice, only to see a terrifying demonic chi drifting over. Who's there? At this moment, a few old men descended from the skies, and 3 of them appeared consecutively. These 3 old men were all supreme elders of the White Deer Institute. Only now did they discover that there were actually people spying on the White Deer Institute. It was just that the distance between them was too great, and they actually couldn't sense it. A raging wind gusted by as the silhouettes of terrifying demonic beasts floated in the air. Numerous demonic beasts stared coldly at the supreme elders of the White Deer Institute, and one of them coldly stated, "It's too late to come out now. We will handle this matter on behalf of the White Deer Institute." Who are you, and what do you mean by that? One of the supreme elders froze as he coldly asked. The old granny with the snake staff in her hands stared at him as she icily replied, "You don't need to care about who I am. As for what I mean, these 4 people offended their superiors, offending the Azure Emperor token, and disrespecting the successor of the Azure Emperor. Kill them without mercy." As the sound of the old granny's voice faded, a cold intent gushed forth, enveloping Di Cheng, Bailu Yu, Bailu Tong, as well as Di Cheng's guards. The cold eyes of the old granny caused an intense fear to blossom in their hearts. These people were here to protect Qin Wenyan. They wanted to kill them all. "Don't you dare!" The clan elder roared angrily. These people wanted to kill him, and his children were among them. The demonic light in the old granny's eyes was akin to that of a venomous viper. Since the White Deer Institute dares to defy the Azure Emperor's orders, protecting those who offended their superiors, there's no longer a need for the Azure faction to exist. Chapter 288. In that case, there's no longer a need for the Azure faction to exist. Her voice drifted into the ears of those from the White Deer Institute, causing them to feel a chill in their hearts. The old woman was threatening to wipe out the entire White Deer Institute. Since you dared to protect a sinner who disrespected the successor of the Azure Emperor, what's the point of keeping the Azure faction alive? Who are you exactly? That supreme elder stared at the old woman. Each and every one of them exuded a towering aura that was incomparably terrifying. Just this level of strength alone was sufficient to create a storm of blood in the White Deer Institute. Not only that, there was obviously someone behind them. That person was definitely capable of leveling the entire White Deer Institute to the ground. "I'm a protector of the Azure Emperor's successor," the old woman coldly replied. After which, she turned her gaze onto Di Cheng and the rest. The 4 of them had already been surrounded, and the terrifying aura they exuded made them feel a sense of death looming over them. "We're only observing. We definitely won't do anything to the successor of the Azure Emperor. Sir, can you please show mercy?" Another supreme elder pleaded. The appearance of these people undoubtedly proved Qin Wentian's identity. There shouldn't be any mistake. "I believe you guys, but we're also observing. These people offended their superiors. Not only did they not have the most basic respect, they even dared to act against the person with the Azure Emperor token." As the sound of the old woman's voice faded, a corpse fell from the air. Upon seeing the corpse, the hearts of the crowd shuddered. This corpse was actually the Heavenly Dipper sovereign inscriptionist who fought against Qin Wenyan. Those from the White Deer Institute were observing, so were they. Since these people were so disrespectful, how could he not kill them today to establish his prestige? If not, thousands of years later, these people would have completely forgotten about the prestige of the Azure Emperor. They wouldn't even have the most basic respect for the successor of the Azure Emperor. "I'm a descendant of the Di clan, the direct line of descent of the Azure Emperor." Di Cheng roared as he stared at the old woman, feeling the cold, killing intent radiating from her. The old woman lowered her head, sweeping her gaze over to Di Cheng as she icily stated, As a descendant of the D clan, you should remember the Azure Emperor's last words. You know your crimes, but you still chose to violate them. After saying that, the old woman waved the snake staff in her hand. A terrifying demonic snake roared and rushed out, opening its mouth wide in an attempt to devour Di Cheng. Di Cheng's face turned pale. He didn't expect these people to really want to kill him. He didn't want to die. A terrifying devouring power spread out. Di Cheng wanted to flee, but he was involuntarily swallowed into the demon snake's stomach. His entire body disappeared. It was an extremely tragic sight. This scene was too horrifying to behold. Di Cheng's guard wanted to flee, yet a withered old man blocked his path. Blasting out with a palm strike, a terrifying demonic chi enveloped the guard, and in an instant, the body of the guard was actually melted into nothingness by the demonic chi. What a terrifying willpower! Qin Wenyan could sense that extremely strong willpower. If he were to touch even a little bit of it, he would probably die. He finally understood why Di was only responsible for the protection of the Emperor Star Academy's map. Only the refinement grounds of Fairy Qingmei could unlock the secrets of the map. The Azure Emperor had already predicted that after his death, the various transcendent powers wouldn't be so easily controlled by a successor of the younger generation. Fairy Qingmei was the person the Azure Emperor trusted the most. She was the one protecting his inheritance in the dark. Di Cheng and his guards were slaughtered in a domineering manner. When Di Feng witnessed this scene, a sharp light flashed in his eyes. He had already guessed where these people came from. Who would have thought that Fairy Qingmei's shadow would always be there? If this was the case, it would be even more difficult for him to become the leader of the Azure Emperor. As for Bailu Tong and Bailu Yu, their countenances turned ashen as they stared at Di Cheng's death. A sense of death enveloped their entire bodies. How could this be? Never would they have thought that in order to obtain the ancient scroll of the Ascendant, they would have to face the threat of death. Since you guys are the protectors of the Azure Emperor, why must you be so ruthless? Bailu Tong's father took a step forwards. How could he allow his son to die in front of him? Kill him. The baleful aura of the middle-aged woman standing in the air was still as cold as ever. Her gaze actually caused the clan elder to not dare to act rashly. Just the gaze of this middle-aged woman was enough to cause one's heart to palpitate. Her strength was definitely extremely terrifying. Ah! The seductive woman giggled as she flew downwards. The skinny old man waved his hand as a corrosive baleful aura enveloped the entire space. Buzz! A pair of terrifying wings materialized behind Bailu Tong's back as he soared through the air. However, he only saw a burly man stomping on the air, causing a thunderous boom to echo out. Bailu Tong's body was forcefully pushed back by the force of the pressure. The void was forcibly sealed by that terrible gravitational force. You've gone too far. A terrifying aura gushed forth from Bailu Tong's father. You'd better persuade him. The middle-aged woman glanced at the other elders and said, "Otherwise, I wouldn't care if White Deer Academy loses one elder." Arg. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that he would die in the White Deer Academy, die because of these people who came here to establish their dominance. Back then, the Azure Emperor didn't leave behind the hidden faction for you guys to enjoy a peaceful life. It was to welcome the appearance of the Azure Emperor's successor, to lead the Azure faction on a path of revival. As the descendants of the Azure faction, you guys naturally have the authority to test the successor. But if you guys don't even have the respect to respect him, the loss of the Azure faction wouldn't matter. The middle-aged woman's voice was as cold as ever as she continued, "The White Deer Academy isn't the only branch of the hidden faction. Now, since young Master Qin has arrived here, you guys have the authority to decide how to follow him and how much support you should give him. However, remember this, without the support of your White Deer Academy, the rise of the Azure faction wouldn't be affected. At that time, don't blame me for not reminding you all. If there comes a day when the Azure faction reunifies the entire Grand Xia, they would have to reorganize themselves. At that time, the choice would no longer be in your hands. Think carefully. If you want to be independent, You have to see if you have the qualifications to do so. Her words were laced with a hint of threat. Right now, your White Deer Academy had the authority to choose how much support you should give to Qin Wenyin. In fact, Qin Wenyin might not even be able to mobilize your White Deer Academy. But when he has the strength to command all the hidden factions, leading them to rise to power, would your White Deer Academy still be able to stand alone? At that time, how they would treat the White Deer Academy would depend on Qin Wentian's attitude. Regarding today's matter, my White Deer Academy is in the wrong. From afar, two silhouettes could be seen walking over. They were originally in closed-door seclusion, but now that someone had reported to them, they immediately rushed over. Right now, all 5 elders of the White Deer Institute were present. Bailu Yi's great-grandfather, who was also the clan leader of the White Deer Institute, took a few steps forward, staring at the middle-aged woman as he stated, "I've already heard of the matter. The White Deer Institute has no objections to your decision. They were disrespectful to the successor of our ancestor and should be killed." As the clan leader, he knew what he had to do. Regardless of whether the White Deer Institute chose to fully support Qin Wendian or not, at the very least, they couldn't afford to offend him. After all, with the support of this power, it would be difficult for Qin Wendian not to rise. Qin Wendian sighed in his heart. When it came to matters that implicated the interests of the White Deer Institute, talent alone wasn't enough. He didn't believe that without the Celestial Lake Palace's domineering attitude, the patriarch of the White Deer Institute would personally apologize. Pucci! A light sound rang out. The crowd turned their gazes towards Bailu Tong, as many of them drew in a deep breath. An elder of the White Deer Institute had fallen here today. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that bringing a 4th-ranked grandmaster to pressure Qin Wenyin would result in his own death. Too many experts had perished in this place today. "Young Master Qin, is there anyone else you wish to settle today's matter?" The White Deer Patriarch politely asked as he looked at Qin Wenyin. "Senior, you can just call me Wenyin." Qin Wenyin smiled. "If Senior doesn't mind, can I address you as great-grandfather like Little E?" "Sure, in that case, this old man will take advantage of you." Seeing how polite Qin Wendian was, the White Deer Patriarch's mood softened. This young man wasn't bad, he didn't have any overbearing attitude. "What are you saying, great-grandfather?" Wendian didn't expect things to turn out this way. "I have to apologize to great-grandfather," Qin Wendian said. Qin Wendian bowed, only to see the White Deer Patriarch waving his hands. "It's this old man's fault for not being strict enough. It has nothing to do with you. As the Grand Elder, I can't absolve myself from the blame," the large-eyed elder added. Such a situation wasn't beneficial to either side, causing the White Deer Institute and Qin Wendian to have a grudge. It would be best if they could resolve this now. "The Grand Elder has always treated me well. Wendian will remember this. Today's matter has nothing to do with the Grand Elder," the large-eyed elder said. Now, in order to establish their authority, the Celestial Lake Palace had killed the main culprits, Bailu Tong and his son. Not only that, the large-eyed elder had always treated him well. Qin Wendian didn't want to create a rift between him and the White Deer Institute because of this matter. Bluntly speaking, the White Deer Institute had disrespected him, but their positions were different. There was no need for him to hold a grudge. The eyes of the middle-aged woman in the air flickered with gentleness. She was extremely satisfied with Qin Wentian's actions. Today, she had established her authority. The Celestial Lake Palace would be the villain. But for Qin Wenyin, he wanted to become the leader of the Azure faction. Naturally, he couldn't afford to fall out with the power he would control in the future. Shifting her gaze, the middle-aged woman's eyes landed on Di Feng. The sharpness in her eyes intensified as she stated, "Tell your elders that it's best if they remember the Azure Emperor's will." Di Feng's countenance was as calm as ever. He bowed slightly to the middle-aged woman as he replied, "Junior will listen to your teachings. I will definitely pass this message to my elders." The middle-aged woman's eyes gleamed with sharpness as she witnessed Di Feng's performance. Di Feng was the future leader of the Azure faction, and as expected, he had extraordinary points. Maybe he would become a strong competitor for Qin Wendian in the future. However, to Qin Wendian, this was also a challenge. If he wanted to achieve what the Azure Emperor had done in the past, he would have to face many difficulties. Junior will return now to inform my elders about the matter regarding the successor of the Azure Emperor. Farewell. D. Feng clasped his hands to the crowd, before bowing to the various elders of the White Deer Institute, before turning and departing. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.